tkinter can help you create GUI apps with Python quickly and easily. And with the TTK Bootstrap library, it's simple to make your tkinter apps look amazing. In this course, John Elder will teach you how to use TTK Bootstrap. He will show you how to use all the main widgets to make your tkinter apps look modern and awesome.
What's going on, guys? John Elder here from tkinter.com, and in this video, I'm going to talk about modern tkinter design with TTK Bootstrap. Alright guys, like I said, in this video, we're going to look at modern GUI design with something called TTK Bootstrap. Now, I've talked about different sort of modern libraries out there in the past, custom TTK, for instance. This is a little bit different. This is very complete and very robust, whereas custom TTK is still kind of new and getting some of the kinks worked out of it. Works great, but still, it doesn't support all the widgets and things like this. This supports all the widgets and then some, adds some new ones. It's really cool. But before we get started, be sure to grab your totally free PDF copy of my Tkinter Widget Quick Reference Guidebook. This thing is awesome, over 150 pages with all the Tkinter widget attributes. Grab your free copy today. Just head over to tkinter.com/widget-book, enter your email address, and I'll send that right out to you. So this is TTK Bootstrap. And if you're familiar with Bootstrap, it's a CSS framework for websites. It's probably one of the most popular CSS frameworks. In fact, if you go to getbootstrap.com, you can see, here's a page on Bootstrap buttons, for instance. You have this sort of very distinct look to things. If you look at nav bars, you can have nav bars for websites, very distinct looking thing. One of the most popular CSS frameworks on the internet. So basically what this package does is it takes that and sort of applies it to Tkinter, which is very cool. So you can see I've got just a couple of examples pulled up here. This is a dark theme. There's dark themes and light themes. So you can see very cool, the buttons here. In fact, let's try and, there we go, zoom in a little bit. So you can see there's like dashes around the buttons. You can have outlines or solid. These things look more modern. These things look more modern. Your check boxes and your toggle switches look better. Even the entry widgets and the spin boxes look better. The date picker looks cool. Very cool. So you can see there's all kinds of different themes to choose from. This one's called Vapor. It's very purpley. You can check out the light themes. There's a bunch of them. Very cool. Flatly. Journal. Litera. And what's great about this is you can pick a theme or you can build your own, and there's resources here to actually build your own theme. So we'll get into all of that in the future. Minty, right? Pulse, Sandstone. So in this video, I want to just sort of walk you through what this is, how you can get started, and all the good things. So just head over to ttkbootstrap.readthedocs.io. And if you click on getting started, this is how you pip install it. Just your regular pip install TTK Bootstrap from your terminal will get it done. In fact, if we head over to our terminal, I could just pip install TTK Bootstrap, and that's really all we need to do. Boom, boom, and it's ready to go. So if we click on the tutorial here and kind of look into this, using it is very simple. It's very much like using your regular Tkinter widgets. So what you're going to do is you're going to come here, and when you import this thing, the docs are telling you to import TTK Bootstrap as TTK. I don't recommend that you do that because we use TTK stuff for other things, the TTK library that comes with Tkinter. I don't think you want to name it that. So I would name it something like TB or something, tkinter Bootstrap or TTKB, something like that, just to distinguish it as Bootstrap and not TTK. But you could do it as TTK if you want, like the docs say. You also want to import these. I'll talk about those in a second here. And if we come down here to use these things, a regular button we would just call a button. Well, instead of that, you call a TTK or TTKB, whatever you named it up here, button, right? And then instead of giving it a style like you would with your widget, you give it a boot style. So instead of using style for all your widgets, you use boot style. That's really kind of the only thing. And you can see they're using these constants here. We've imported these constants. You can also use different things. You can use quotation marks like we've done in regular videos all the time. In fact, you could see, you could use quotation marks with dashes, without dashes, with spaces, without spaces, with commas, without commas, or just the constant capital letters, whatever you feel comfortable with. So that's kind of nice. And really, that's sort of all there is to it. Everything else is just like using Bootstrap as normal for the most part. So when you start it, you could create a regular root TK instance, or you could use a window instance, which is slightly different and they kind of recommend. So we would probably use that. And like I said, we're going to get into this in the next few videos. We're going to start building stuff out with this. In this video, I just want to kind of give you a very brief overview. And to pick a theme, it's just as easy as whenever you if you use a window instance, you just pass in the theme equals and then the name of the theme. Or if you use the regular old way of doing it, you just create a style equals ttk.style and then pass in the name. Like I said, we're going to probably be using this window thing going forward when we use this, but we'll get into all that later. And that's kind of all there is to it. Now, if you come up here to the top and look at the style guide, you could see all of the different things you could do with this. So right off the bat, the colors that this offers are the basic Bootstrap colors, this sort of blue, green, light blue, orange, red, light and dark, right? I'm sure you can override those, but those are the basic ones that come with Bootstrap, right? So if you've used Bootstrap on websites, you're familiar with this color scheme already. Very cool. And I'm just going to go through here and show you what these all look like. So the check buttons, these are the basic check buttons. Very cool. The combo box, much more modern looking. Date entry, little calendar picker tool, very cool. There's a date picker pop-up with a calendar, very awesome, right? Just your regular entry box, you could colorize and do things with, that's cool. There's this flood gauge, which is not in regular Tkinter, right? Sort of a progress bar button-y looking thing. Very cool, right? Just one of the few things that are extra in this over regular Tkinter. It's got your basic frame. It's got your basic label frame, right? But you can colorize these label frames, which is very cool. Yeah, menu buttons look better. There's this cool meter, right? Which is not regular in Tkinter, so that's cool. That's a little extra thing. You can see it has dashes or solid or whatever. Very cool. Notebooks, sort of the tab thing in Tkinter, but a little more modern looking. Paned window. Move those around. Progress bars look better, right? Very cool. You could also have striped ones. Definitely more modern looking, right? Radio buttons, different colors. You can have a scale. Zoop, zoop. Very nice. Irregular scroll bar. A separator. The most popular Tkinter widget, the separator. It's just a line. Size grip where you can move things around. Very cool. Your spin boxes, we've looked at these. Tree view, right? Boom. Much more modern looking tree views. Very cool. And then there's some stuff on legacy widgets. We don't really care all that much about that. So you can click here and read on the API. There's even more stuff in here. So if you want to do a color chooser, there's information on that. There is color drop dialog. Very cool. All kinds of cool stuff in here. There's a regular dialog box, font dialog. Pop this thing up, very useful. Message boxes look better, right? Message dialog. There's a query box. This little thing. Very cool. Just all kinds of stuff. You can look in styles, colors, theme definitions. And there's also a style builder, right? This is a different app that you need to pip install. We'll get into all of that too. Very cool. Helps you build your own styles and themes and things like that. Here's some stuff on boot style. Anyway, all kinds of cool stuff you could look through here if you're interested. We're going to be going through all of this because I think this is very cool. I'm going to be building a bunch of videos on this in the coming, days and weeks. Probably create a course on it too. But very, very cool. Lots of fun. Very easy to use. And definitely check it out. So that's TTK Bootstrap. Very cool. Like I said, we're going to be getting into this in the coming videos. And it should be a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm excited. So now we're going to actually dive in and start learning how to use it. So in this video, we're going to do just a very basic app to get it up and running, show you how to get an app up and running. I'm going to show you how to do labels and buttons in this video, as well as a little function based on the button. So we can click this and it says, goodbye world, hello world, goodbye world, hello world, etc. So very basic, but it'll allow us to see the different types of buttons we can use and the different ways you can configure labels and buttons and all that good stuff. So head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. So I've got a file. I'm just calling it tb_intro. TB short for TTK Bootstrap, I guess. TB, whatever. And this is our basic Tkinter starter code that we would always have. Root, TK instance, your icon, you set the size. and you've got your main loop. So your TTK Bootstrap app is going to be a little bit different than that. So first things first, we need to make sure we actually have TTK Bootstrap installed on our system. So head over to your terminal and just pip install TTK Bootstrap. I've already got it, so it's going to be like, hey, you've already got it. But if you don't, it'll go ahead and install, and you should be good to go. So first, we need to come up here and import some things that come with TTK Bootstrap. So first, it's from TTK Bootstrap.constants. We want to import everything. And I'll show you what those are in just a second. You don't necessarily have to do this, but you may want to, you may not. I'll explain what that means in just a minute. So we also need to import TTK Bootstrap itself. So we want to import TTK Bootstrap as, and I'm going to call this TB. Now they suggest you import it as TTK, but if you're going to use TTK, or if you're, going to get confused by that, I suggest you just import it as something else. TB, short for TTK Bootstrap. Or you might want to import it as TTKB, whatever floats your boat. I'm just going to go TB. It really doesn't matter, but you need to import it as something so that you can use it. So, okay, in a normal Tkinter app, you have your TK instance. Now, you can do that with TTK Bootstrap, but they don't suggest it. They suggest something else. Instead, they say you should go tb.window, and then inside of here, you can pass whatever theme you want. So you can go theme name equals, and I want superhero. I'm going to use the superhero theme. So there are a bunch of themes you can use. Head over to the TTK Bootstrap docs. That's at ttkbootstrap.readthedocs.io. And you can come over to themes, click either light or dark. I want dark. And then here, these are just the themes. So if you want solar, you type in solar. If you want superhero, you type in superhero. Darkly, darkly. You get the idea. So go ahead and pick one. I've picked superhero. I think that looks kind of cool. That's neat. Now we can click on Style Guide. We're going to look at that in just a minute too. But first, we can come back over here. And if we just go ahead and save this and run this again, Python tb_intro.py, we get an error because I forgot an equal to sign, it looks like. Yeah, right there. So this should be root equals. So now I'll come back over here, give this another try. We have another error. Man, I'm on fire today. This should be TTK Bootstrap. There we go. All right, one more time. We see right off the bat, we have a different color background. Now, when you pick a specific theme, every widget you use is going to be colored and shaped and whatever based on that theme. So keep that in mind. So let's start out with a label. So I'm going to call this my_label. And this is going to be a tb.label. And now it's tb here because we imported this as tb there. So if you imported it as something else, this would be whatever you imported it as. Same thing up here with the window thing. And these all act pretty much the same as your basic Tkinter widgets. So you can set the text any way you want. I'm just going to say hello world. You can also set the font in the normal way that you would. So I'm going to say Helvetica and give this a size like 28. Now here's where it gets a little bit different. You have this boot style attribute here, and this is where you get to pick however you want to style this thing. So TTK Bootstrap comes with the same basic color scheme that the Bootstrap CSS framework comes with. So let me just copy and paste these in real quick. I'll put these on another line. You have the default, primary, secondary, success, info, warning, danger, light, and dark. So light and dark, they are how they sound. One's light, one's dark. The default is just the default. It's usually like white or something. Primary is blue, secondary is gray, success is green, info is a light blue, warning is yellow, I think, and danger is red. And you could see these if you want. Head over to the style guide, and they're listed here. So primary is this dark blue, secondary is gray, green, sort of light blue. Yeah, warning looks like orange, I guess, and danger is red, and then light and dark. So those are sort of the colors you can choose from. So let's say, let me put this on another line so we can see this. We could just start out with the default and see what that looks like. Now, I've got this in quotation marks, and that's perfectly fine. But up here, we imported these constants. So if you want, you can use just the constants, which are all capital, whatever, right? I tend to not do that because I'm used to putting them in quotes like regular Tkinter and regular TTK stuff. So I will usually just go like this and, do it like that. Either way works, whatever you're comfortable with. But if you want to use the constants, you have to import them up there. If you don't have to import it at all. So, all right, let's go ahead and my_label dot pack this guy, and let's give this a pad Y of like 50 to really push it down the screen. So let's save this and run it, see what we have here. And boom, we get this hello world in this sort of default light color. Now this is white in default in this theme. That color might be a different color in a different theme. So just sort of keep that in mind. So if you're using a light themed theme, I'm guessing that's probably going to be black as the default instead of white. So you just have to play around with your specific theme to see what's what. So we can come back over here real quick and play around with this if we want. If we wanted to change this to danger, for instance, then if we save this and run it, we're going to get red text, right? So that's cool. Now there is another attribute you could play around with when it comes to labels in your boot style. And to use multiple attributes, you just put a comma in there and then do the other one you want. So we can also do something called inverse. And this will just sort of reverse whatever your color is and give you sort of a blocky looking background. So if we save this and run it, it's kind of interesting. We see now the whole thing is like this square of the inverse color. So the text was red, now the block is red, and the actual text color is white itself. So that's kind of cool. Keep that in mind if you want to do something like that. And when it comes to labels, that's pretty much all there is to it. So you could inverse or not, and then you pick your color. So, okay, that's cool. Now let's create a button. Let's call this one my_button. And this is going to be a tb.button. And just like the label, pretty much everything about this thing will act the same way a regular Tkinter button acts, except you have this boot style attribute. All the TB widgets have a boot style attribute. That's sort of the main difference. So here we can set the text. We can set this equal to click me, right? Whatever. And then we want to add a boot style and set that equal to, first, what color do we want this to be? Well, let's go primary this time and see how that looks. So let's go my_button. Dot pack, give this a pad Y of 20 to push it down screen a little bit. So let's save this and run it, see how this looks. And so you get this primary color blue. Click me, you'll notice when you click on it, there's little dashes around it. That's kind of neat. All right, there we go. So there are several different attributes you can play around with in the boot style for your button. So here we have primary. Let me just put this on another line here so we can see. We can change this from a regular button to an outline. So this is kind of cool. And let's change this from primary to info. Success. Let's see what success looks like. Always wondered to know what success looks like. And you can see now it's outlined, right? That's what that outline attribute does. And of course the color is green. If we hover over it, it turns back into a blocky thing. When you click it, you get the little white dashes. So that's kind of cool. You can also sort of make it not really even a button at all. You can make it just like look like a link, right? So instead of outline, we could put just link here, save this and run it. Now you're just going to get flat out text. But if you hover over it, it kind of changes color like an HTML link. And again, you can click it like normal. So that's kind of cool. I'm going to go ahead and change that back to outline. Very cool. Now, buttons do things, and to do things with a button in Tkinter, you give it a command. And the same thing works with TTK Bootstrap. You give it a command. So let's create a command called changer. We don't have that just yet, so let's come up here and create it. Let's define changer. And here, outside of here, let's create a counter and set it equal to 0 just for fun. And then let's set our counter plus equal to 1 every time we click the button. And let's run some logic. Let's say if counter modulus 2 equals 0, that means it's divisible by 2. That means it's even. Let's change our label, my_label dot config, and set the text equal to hello world. Just go ahead and copy this. Else, let's set the text equal to goodbye world. So if it's even, it'll say hello world. If it's odd, it'll say goodbye world, right? So the main thing I want to show you here is this .config. You use .config in Tkinter to change things on the fly later on in your app. And that same thing holds true in TTK Bootstrap. So if you're worried about that, same exact thing there. So nothing to worry about there. We can go ahead and save this and run it. One last time, we can click me. We need to make our label global. So let's come up here and say global counter. There we go. Now we come back here and run this guy. Click this. Goodbye world, hello world, goodbye world, hello world. So there you have a very basic app with TTK Bootstrap. Like I said, it's very similar to using regular Tkinter or TTK widgets, just a couple little things. Really, the boot style thing is the main difference you're going to deal with on a day-to-day basis when you're using this, and pretty cool. In this video, we want to look at checkboxes, and there are lots of different options for checkboxes with TTK Bootstrap. You have your regular checkbox that you normally have. You got a little checkbox there. You also have these tool buttons where if you click on it, it sort of unhighlights, or if you click on it again, it highlights. And you have the same thing with outlined. There you go. And we also have these round toggle buttons and square toggle buttons. So we're gonna look at all of these in this video. Very cool and really easy to use. So I've got our basic Tkinter starter code. I'm calling it checkbuttons.py. And I've got our theme set to superhero. And I've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. And first thing, let's just create a simple label. So let's go my_label. And I'm just gonna use a regular Tkinter label for this. And let's just say, click the checkbox or check button, whatever, below. And, you know, just for fun, let's give this a font of Helvetica and like a size of 18. And then let's my_label.pack this guy. And I'm gonna give it a pad Y of, let's bring it down 40 from the top and then 10 from the thing below it, okay? So first things first, let's create a check button. And remember from regular Tkinter, whenever we create a check button, checkbox, it's called a check button in Tkinter, we create a variable. And I'm gonna call this var1, and I'm gonna set that equal to an int var. And an int var is a Tkinter variable, right? It's an integer variable. And the reason why we want integer is because when you click a checkbox, we want it to be either a 1 or a 0. So if it's checked, it'll be a 1. If it's not checked, it's a 0. That allows us to run logic very easily to say, hey, if it's 1, do this. If it's not 1, do something else, right? So we'll set up an int var for that. And then I'm going to create a checkbox. I'm just going to call it my check, whatever. And this is going to be a tb.check button. All right. And so let's give this a boot style of, let's say primary. Remember, those are our colors, right? Primary, secondary, info, success, danger, all that stuff, right? So that's really all we have to do there. And let's set the text equal to check me out. Check button, check. Yeah. And then let's set the variable to that var1 we just created. And then we want to give this, actually, let's start to put these on separate lines because it's getting a little hard to read. So our variable is going to be var1. We want to set the on value. So what is it when it gets checked? We'll set that to 1. We want to set the off value to 0. So if it's not checked, give it a 0. And then let's give this a command of, and I'm going to call this checker. And what this does is it'll run a function called checker every time we click the button, right? So, okay, we'll create that in just a second. For now, let's go my_check.pack and give this a pad Y of like, I don't know, 10 or so to push it down the screen a bit. So, all right, let's come up here and define our checker function. And for now, let's just pass. So let's save this and run it just to make sure that's working okay. So let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory and let's run python checkbuttons.py. And when we do, we get this little thing here. It says check me out. There's a little box. We can click it. It's blue or not. Right? And if we want to change the color, remember, we know how to do that. We just come up here to our boot style. And let's say we want to turn it green. That would be info. If you're not familiar with the colors, take a look at the documentation or check the previous video in this playlist where I talked about all the colors. So we can come back over here real quick, just run this guy again. And now when we click on this, it's that light blue. That's what info is. We could say danger, for instance, save this and run it. Right now it's red. So, okay, that looks good. So now let's just change this back to primary because I like primary. And if we want to play with this function, we don't necessarily have to, but if you're not familiar with how to do check buttons in Tkinter, just very quickly, we can say, hey, if var1.get, that will get whether it's a 1 or a 0. If it equals 1, then we could say, I don't know, my_label.config and set the text equal to checked, right? Else, we can set this equal to unchecked, right? So if we save this and run it, now when we click this, we check, hey, it's checked. When we uncheck it, hey, it's unchecked, right? So a very simple example, but in this function here, you can do anything you want. So we're just changing the label. Obviously, you would do something else. Whatever you want to do, you do it in this function. So, okay, that's the check button. Very, very easy to use. But there's also something called a tool button, which is a square box. It looks like a button, but you can toggle it on and off, and it changes color from the color to a muted version of that color, or gray if you uncheck it. So tool buttons are really easy. Again, I'm going to go var2 equals int var, because we always want to use an int var with these guys. And let's just call this my underscore check2, and this is going to be a tb.check button again, right? But the boot style will now change a little bit. So first, what color do we want this? Well, let's say we want danger, which is red. So to change it from a check button to a tool button, all we have to do is type in tool button, right? These all can stay the same if we want. So I'll just kind of copy these to make this quicker. Instead of var1, it's obviously going to be var2, but everything else will stay the same. Now we can my underscore check2.pack and give this a pad y of like, I don't know, 10 or something. Push it down screen a little bit. That looks good, except, oh, we forgot text. So here, let's say text equals tool button. Woohoo! Right. And give this a comma. Okay, go ahead and save this, run it. See how this looks. All right, now we got this tool button. You'll notice if we hover over it, it changes color. That's kind of cool, right? If we click it, boom, now it says checked, and it stays red. Now we can click it again and move our mouse away, and now it becomes unchecked again, and it still changes color when we hover. Very cool. So that's the tool button. You can also do a tool button with an outline instead of this solid color, right? Super easy to do that. In fact, I'm just going to copy this whole thing and come here and say outlined tool button and just paste all this in here. And let's change this to var3, my check3, set that to 3. And instead of saying tool button, let's say outlined tool button. And here, same thing, we have this, we have tool button, but we also then pass in a third thing called outline. And that's all there is to it. Now we can, oh, we got to change this to my check3. Okay, save this, head back over here, run this guy. Now we get this cool outline button. Same thing, if we hover over it, it changes color. If we click it, it becomes solid. If we unclick it, it goes back to outline, and very cool. Okay, next we want to look at round toggle buttons. A little bit fancier, but pretty cool. I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this stuff and paste it in here. And let's change this to var4, my check4. Change this to var4 and come down here and change that to var4. But now let's change this boot style from danger color. Let's mix it up. Let's change it to success. I think that's green. And instead of a tool button and outline, we want a round dash toggle. And here, let's call this for the text round toggle. Right? And yeah, that's all there is to that. Let's go ahead and save this. Head back over here, run this guy again. And now we have this cool round toggle button. If we click it, it changes to green because success is green. Very cool. And you'll notice it's not changing here because we didn't dial in the function for this. But very cool. Again, this is green because over here we called success. If you wanted to color it different color, you would just change the color of that. So very cool. Finally, we have the square toggle button, and it is very much like the round toggle button. Let's just change this to 5, call this my check5, var5, and my check5. And here, let's call this square toggle button. And you will never guess how to do this. We changed this from round to square. Very difficult. And let's get crazy here. Let's change this to warning. I think that's yellow or orange or something like that. So yeah, that's all we have to do. That's the only difference there. Save this, run it. Now we have this cool square toggle. Boom, we click this. Changes to, what is that? Orange, I guess. Very cool. So those are checkboxes, tool buttons, outline tool buttons, round toggles, and square toggles with TTK Bootstrap. Very easy to do all of these things and much, much nicer looking than the regular Kinter check button that you're probably used to. It works pretty much the same as the Kinter check button. All right, like I said, in this video, I want to talk about resizing buttons, not just the size of the button, but also the font on the button. You can see here's a regular button, here's a bigger button. Now this is a little tricky, and that's why we need to talk about it. So I've got our basic starter code. I'm calling this button_size.py because why not? We're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB. This has to be installed, so you have to pip install it if you haven't. And I've set the window to superhero, and it's 500 by 350. So let's start out by creating a button, and I'm just going to call this my_button. And this is going to be a tb.button because we've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. And I want to set the text as, I don't know, hello world. Now, normally to change the size of a button, we would give this a font. We would go font equal, and I'd say like Helvetica, and then I maybe make it size 18. And that would make the whole button bigger to compensate for the size of that font. But if we try this, my_button.pack, let's give this a pad Y like 40, push it down the screen. Save this, head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run Python button_size.py, and we get an error, right? Unknown option font. It doesn't even know what that is. So we obviously can't do that. Now, we can get rid of that, and with regular Kinter, we can change the size. So we can set the width to like 30. If we save this and run it, you see we get this longer button. Now this is, I believe, in font, right? So it's font characters, 30 font characters. This is not pixels. So if you have a bigger font, it'll be bigger characters and the button will be a different size, which is kind of weird. Now, this might be what you're looking for if you just want to change the size and not the font. You can use width. You cannot use height. There is no height attribute. So we can try and change this to 20. If we do, we're going to get an error again. Doesn't know what height is, right? So what can we do? Well, first off, let's just get rid of this height and width. I want to change the font. Almost always when I want to make a button bigger, it's because I want the font bigger on the button. So how do we do that? Well, we have to use a style, right? And this is also a little bit tricky. Now I have a video on style with Kinter. I'll link to it up there. You can check that out if you're not familiar with style. This is a slightly different use of style, and I'll show you why in just a second. So first of all, let's change our boot style, and let's make this success, which I think is green. Let's save this and run it just to make sure. Yeah, so we've got a green button, and we want to make it bigger. So how do we do that? Well, like I said, we have to use a style. So I'm going to call it, you can call it anything you want. I'm going to call it my_style, and this is a tb.style widget. Okay, so there's our style. Now we need to configure it. So let's go my_style.configure. And inside of here, first we have to name it. So I usually call these my.tButton. Now, whatever widget you're doing, it's going to be T the widget. So T button, T label, T check button, etc. Like I said, I got a video on this. You can check it out if you're not familiar with all this style stuff. So there we go, my T button. And then we can do whatever we want. So let's give this guy a font. And I want to say Helvetica, and then size 18. Then down here in our button, we have to say, hey, use that style. So we'll set the style equal to, and let's put these on another line because it's starting to get a little bit hard to read. And we just set that equal to my.tButton, which is what we called it right here. So you would think this would work, and it sort of does, but sort of not. So let's take a look at this. Sure enough, our button is bigger, our font is bigger, but wait a second, this is a primary color. What's going on here? Remember, we set this as success, not primary. What's going on? Well, it's overriding the, I don't know, subclass maybe? Does that sound right? I don't know, it's doing something, right? That we don't want. And it's because we called this my. That's sort of what I would normally do. But instead of that, you need to name it what color system thing you're using, right? So we're using success. So we need to call this success.tButton. And then down here, when we reference it, it's success.tButton. Now, if we save this guy, head back over here, run it again, we get our success, right? Well, that's cool and that works, but what if you want to use something besides the primary, secondary, success, info, color scheme? If you head back over to our documentation, you remember there's all kinds of things you can use. You could use outline, you can use link. Well, I guess that's the only two things you could use, outline and link. How do we use those? Well, super easy. We just add them here with another dot. So if we want this to be success and outline, we just type in outline. Now notice this is capitalized. If you do lowercase, it won't work, right? It has to be capitalized. That's the convention here. So the name of your color that you want to use, success, and then whatever you want to do with it, right? And then we can come down here and again call success dot outline. Okay, now if we save this guy, head back over here, run it again, we get our success outline button. It's now bigger and that works great. Now we can also give this more width, right? So we can come back over here and like we did earlier, we could, set the width equal to 20 or something. Come back, run this guy again. And now we have a wider button as well. That's it. And that's all there is to it. So a little complicated, a little bit tricky, but once you understand the tricks here, and those are mainly just in the naming convention right there, it's a piece of cake. Okay, so in this video, we want to look at using combo boxes with TTK Bootstrap. And you can see we can click on this and I've got it set up two ways. One where if we select the thing, we can click the button and it will update the label. The other way, we can just use a binding and say I click on Wednesday, boom, it says you picked Wednesday. So we're gonna look at all of this stuff in this video. So I've got a file, I'm just calling it combo.py. It's our regular starter code that we always have. We've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. I set the theme name to superhero and we're ready to go. So let's create a label. I'm gonna call it my label. And this is gonna be a tb.label. And remember, we're importing it as TB. That's why this is tb.whatever. And we want to put this in root, and I want the text to say, just for now, hello world. And let's give this a font of Helvetica with a size 18. So, okay, that's good. Let's my_label.pack this guy. And let's give this a pad Y of, say, 30 to really push it down the screen. Okay, so now let's create drop-down options. And I'm just going to create a variable called days, and this is going to be a Python list. And so we can go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. This is very exciting. Friday, Saturday. We should probably capitalize Saturday. It's the most important day. And Sunday. So we've got this Python list, and we're going to use that to insert into our combo box to have the options that drop down whenever we click on the combo box, right? Basic combo box stuff. So now let's create combo box. And up here, let's say create label. We don't want the label to be jealous that it didn't get its own comment, right? I don't know. So let's go my combo, call this anything you want. And this is going to be a tb.combo box. And we want to put it in root. And let's give this a boot style of, say, success to make it green. And if you're not familiar with this color system, check back the previous videos in this series. I go over all that in great detail. So we want to also set the values to days. And that's just this list we created right there. And really that's all we need. So let's now my_combo.pack this guy and let's give this a pad Y of 20. Now let's go ahead and save this and run it just to make sure this is looking okay. So I'm in my ctkinter.com directory and let's just go Python combo.py. And when we do, we see this drop-down list. It says it has all these listed. When we click on them, nothing happens. And you'll notice by default, it's blank. So we can set that to anyone we want by default. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say set combo default. And we do that the same way we do it as in regular Kinter. We just call my combo.current and we pass in the number of the thing we want to show up. So Python lists always start at 0. So if we want Monday, it's 0. If we want Tuesday, it would be 1, right? So we can set that to 0. Let's go ahead and save this and run it just to make sure that's looking okay. And sure enough, now it says Monday there instead of it being blank. And you notice that it's green. That's the success color. We can change that by changing it to primary or danger or info or any of the other, the default, whatever you want for your colors. So, okay, that's good. So now let's create a button to where when we select one of these and click the button, something happens. This text up here changes. Super easy to do that. Let's create a button. And I'm just going to call it my_button. And this is going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in root. We want the text to say, click me, whatever. Let's give this a command of clicker. And let's give this a boot style of, I don't know, danger. We'll make it red, right? So then let's my_button, .pack this guy and give him a pad Y of 20. Okay, so now we've got this clicker command and we need to create it so that when we click that button, something happens. So let's come up here to the top and let's define clicker. And what do we want to do? We just want to change our label. So let's go my_label.config and let's just change the text. And I'm going to create an F string and say, you clicked on, and then we can pass in my_combo .get. And that will get whatever we have selected. So let's put a little exclamation mark on there. And okay, we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and save this and run it, see if that worked. So we can click on Friday. You clicked on Friday. Woo! And that's all there is to it. Super simple. Now we can also bind this thing so that we don't need a button at all. We could just click on here, say we click Wednesday, the text will change to you clicked on Wednesday, right? So how do we do that? Well, same way we do it with regular Tkinter. Let's come down here and let's bind the combo box. So once we do this, the button will be pretty much irrelevant. We won't need to click it anymore, but I'll just leave the button there for now. So let's go my_combo.bind. And then inside of here, this is always the format. You have an action and then a command of some sort. And let's say click_bind or something like that. And this is the function that will get called whenever we click the combo box. And inside of here, we just use two sets of these angular brackets and we pass in combo box selected, right? And the C is capitalized and the S is capitalized. The B in box is not capitalized. And I see people make that mistake all the time. So make sure that's lowercase. So combo box selected. And this function will get called. Now we don't have this function yet, so we need to come up here and create it. And let's create binding function. And so let's define our click bind. Now this is a binding, and with all bindings, we need to pass an event because a click is an event and that needs to get passed to the function. Now we're not actually going to use that for anything, but it still needs to get passed because the binding will send that extra info. And if the function doesn't see it, you're going to have problems. So now we can just copy this whole thing and paste that in there. And let's give this guy a comment too. Create, I don't know, button click function. Good enough. Okay, so that should do the trick. Let's save this and head back over here, run this one more time. So now when we click on here and let's pick Saturday, hey, you clicked on Saturday. If we click Wednesday, you clicked on Wednesday. Now if we click this again, nothing happens because it still says Wednesday. And that function will get called and it'll just say you clicked on Wednesday, which is what it already said. So it doesn't look like it's changing. But whichever way you want to do, binding or using a button, super easy with TTK Bootstrap. And that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to look at the entry box for TTK Bootstrap. Now, this is super useful because you're always going to use entry boxes, and there are a few different little things you need to know about it. So we're going to dive into it in this video. So I've got our basic starter code that we've always got. I'm calling it entry_widget.py, and we've imported TTK Bootstrap. You've got to pip install that if you haven't yet. And then we've set the superhero theme, and that's pretty much it. So let's come down here and create an entry widget. So I'm going to go my_entry, and that's going to be a tb.entry widget. And the reason why it's TB is because I'm importing TTK Bootstrap as TB up here. And we want to put this thing in root, and that'll be fine for now. So let's go my_entry.pack, and let's give this a pad Y of like 50 to really push it down the screen. So now I want to create a button to where whenever I type something in the entry box and click the button, it does something. It does something with that text. So let's just call this my_button. And this is going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in root, and let's give this a boot style of like, I don't know, danger or something. Make it a red button, I don't know. And maybe outline as well, just for fun. We want the text to say, click me, I don't know. And we want the command to equal, I don't know, let's just say speak, something like that. Now we'll create this function in just a second. So let's go my_button.pack and give this a pad Y of 20 to push it down screen. Finally, let's create a quick label. Let's go my_label, and this is going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in root. We want the text to say, I don't know, hello world for now, or even just nothing at all. Yeah, let's leave it at nothing at all. So let's go my_label.pack and give this a pad Y of 20 to push it down screen a little bit. Okay, so now when we click that button, we want this speak function to run. And let's just take that my_label and then .config it and set the text equal to an F string. And let's say you typed, and then we put in brackets, and then we can call my entry, whatever we typed into my entry. So let's go my entry.get and just put that up on the screen. So let's go ahead and save this and run it, see what this looks like. Head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run python entry widget.py. And when we do, we get this basic entry box. We could say John Elder or something like that. Here we see click me, we click it. It says you typed John Elder. Very simple. So here's your basic entry box. Now we didn't do any styling to this. We didn't change anything about it. This is just the sort of default view, right? So that's fine. Maybe that's what you want, but we can play around with this. So let's do that. Let's head back over here. And the first thing we could do, obviously, is give this a boot style, as you do with all TTK Bootstrap things. And then we can add a color scheme here. So your basic color schemes are primary, secondary, success, info, warning, danger, light, and dark. So that's for basically all widgets in TTK Bootstrap. We understand that. We've looked at this before. So let's say I want green. That's success. We could do that. Save this, run it again. And we misspelled boot style. So let's go boot style. There we go. Now if we save this and run it again, we get the box outlined in green. Green is success. Pretty cool. What if we want to change the size of this thing? Well, we do that the same way we would with a regular Tkinter entry widget. We just set the font equal to, and let's say I want to change the text to Helvetica. And let's say we want the size 18. That will make 18 size text, which will definitionally make the box correspondingly big to 18 size text. So that's one way we can do it. Let's save that and run it. Now we've got a bigger box, right? You typed hello. Now this text is sort of light colored, white, light gray, something like that, whatever the color that is. We can change that as well. Let's start to add these on separate lines so we can read this easier. And to do that, normally with a Tkinter entry widget, you would set the foreground to whatever color. But with this, we need to set the foreground. You need to spell it out. So we can use any sort of HTML color code, so 003660, something like that. Or we could just, say red or green. We want it to be the same color. So, hey there, whatever. Now it's green, right? Hey, you typed hey there. Very cool. That's one way to do it. We can also set the width attribute. So if we come back here and instead set the width to, let's say 5. Now this is characters, it's not pixels. So our text is size 18. So that's 18 sized characters. So keep that in mind. So it's not a great way to do it, but that's Tkinter. So you can see now it's much smaller. I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 characters, 6. So it's exactly 5 characters in width. So you can do it like that if you want. I don't know, kind of weird. I just like changing the font text. Finally, we can make this into like a password protected deal. Let me change this to 15. And we do that using show. So we could say, hey, show these characters whenever somebody types. And we could put a little asterisk or whatever. So we can run this guy again. Now when we type, we get nothing but stars. When we click it, the actual text still comes through. It doesn't come through as stars. It comes through as whatever you text. So I typed in John Elder here and click this. It says you type John Elder. This is just for like appearance sake, right? So that's cool. We did stars, but you could do anything you want. I could put, ampersands or whatever you want. This will show. Now we get a bunch of ampersands. I'm going to go ahead and change that back because that's just plain weird. So that's the entry widget for TTK Bootstrap. Super simple, acts almost exactly as you would expect it to, just like a regular Tkinter entry box. And yeah, pretty cool. In this video, we're going to look at this flood gauge. Very cool. We can start it. We can stop it. We can increment it by a few. When we do, we can get the correct position it's at, 67. And this is something new and different that just comes with TTK Bootstrap. Obviously, there's no flood gauge in regular Tkinter, so this is kind of exciting and really fun. So we're going to dive into that in this video. So I've got a file here. I'm just calling it flood.py. It's our basic TTK Bootstrap starter code that we always have. We imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. You got to pip install that if you haven't already. We've set the window theme to superhero. And pretty much everything else is normal Tkinter. So let's come down here and create a flood gauge. I'm just going to call this my gauge. Call it anything you want. And that's going to be a TB dot flood gauge. And it's TB dot because we've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB up here. So TB goes there. And we want to put this in root and we want to give it a boot style. And you're going to use any of your Bootstrap color styles. I'm going to pick success. That's green, I believe. You could pick primary, secondary, danger, info, light, dark, all the regular colors that you have to choose from. Now, we can also set the font for this. So I'm going to make the font a little bigger just so it's easier for us to see. I'm going to set that as Helvetica and give it like a size 18. Now, here's where it gets a little bit different. So right off the bat, I want to give this a mask of POS, short for position, right? Now, we can keep track of the exact position of our flood gauge by passing in, just like if it was an F string, you know, you kind of do an F string like that. It's not an F string, but we put then a percentage sign after it. This will automatically update with the current position as it moves up and down, right? So you don't have to do that, but if you want it to sort of keep track of what it's doing on the flood gauge itself, that's very, very useful. So we could do all kinds of different things. We can set the maximum, for instance. So, you know, you might want this to be 100 or you might want it to be 50 or, you know, whatever you want. I'm just going to put it at 80 for now, just for fun. We'll play around with this. And then you could also set the orient. And by default, this is going to be horizontal. There you go. So if you're going to do horizontal, which is left to right, you don't have to put your orient in there. You could just leave that out. But if you want to do it up and down, then it would be vertical. And we'll play around with this and change it up in a bit. So finally, we can set the value that we want to start on. So you might want to start it at 0. Obviously, you could just leave this one off if that's the case. But if you want to start it at a certain level, you could put it right there. So now let's my_gauge dot pack this guy. And let's give this a pad Y of like 50. There you go. So let's go ahead and save this, head back over to our code and run this guy. I'm in my tkinter.com directory and let's run python flood.py. And when we do, we see POS position of 10%. It's sort of 10% up. And there we go. So, okay, that's cool. Now this is kind of small. We can make it a lot bigger if we want. And we do that by playing with the pack value. So we could go fill equals X. That's X left and right. And I suppose we should capitalize it, but I'm not sure that matters. So, okay, let's save this and run it. And now you're going to see this is massively all the way, it fills all the way left to right. So, okay, that's, you know, kind of not great. So we can also give this a pad X of like, I don't know, 20 to give it padding on each side. Make it a little bit nicer to look at, I suppose. Okay, so there we go. So I kind of like that. We'll just leave it like that. So, all right, now let's create a button that we could start it and stop it and add some incrementation. And also I'm going to change this from 10% back down to 0 because, I don't know, I don't really need to start it at 10%. So there you go. So let's create a start_button. And that's going to be a TB.button. We want to put it in root. We want the text to say start. And let's give this a boot style of like danger and outline. So it'll be like red outlined. And let's give this a command of starter. And we haven't created that yet, but we will in a second. So let's start_button.pack and give this a pad Y of like 20 to push down the screen a little bit. Now I'm just going to copy this a couple of times. And this one we'll call a stop button. And we'll have the text say stop. And we'll give it a command of stopper. I don't know. And then this one will be, we'll call this inc for increment, INC. And this will be increment. And here, let's call this inker. I don't know. Or incrementer. There we go. So now we want to create these three functions, starter, stopper, and incrementer. So let's come up here. And let's define starter. And we want to pass. And let's define stopper. And we want to pass. And let's define incrementer. And we want to pass. So, okay, to start, it's very easy. So let's start the gauge. We just call my_gauge.start. That's it. Now to stop it, same thing. We call my_gauge.stop. Very complicated. And to increment it, we just call my_gauge.step. And then we say, what steps do we want? So I want it to go every 10, right? So when we click the button, it bops up 10 and then it stops. So we can go ahead and save this and let's run this. And it should work out Okay, let's see what we got. So here we have start, stop, and increment. So let's start, and you can see it just one at a time. Goes like that. We could stop it by stopping, and now we can increment. So 52, 62, 72. And then once it gets to the top, it just starts on over again, right? So that's kind of cool. And there we go. Now, one thing I'll mention is how it comes to the end and then it starts over at 0. That's because of the mode. So you can change that if you want when you define the flood gauge. So here we can set the mode to, and the default is determinate, right? That means keep on going, basically. But we can change it to indeterminate if we want. If we save this and run it, you'll see this sort of ping pongs back and forth from start to finish. So we go start, and you can see, one, it looks different. The gauge itself is not full, but when it hits the end, boom, it bops back down, and it keeps going, and it keeps counting. So we're at now 180, 100, 200, 240, and it's going up to 80, which is what we set our value, our max value at. So this is kind of weird. You may want that for some reason. Same thing works with increment. It will bop back and forth as you increment it. So just sort of keep that in mind. I'm going to change it back to determinate because indeterminate's just, freaking me out. So let's come down here and let's create a label now. So my label, this is going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in root, and we want the text to say, I don't know, position, something like that. And now let's my_label.pack, give this a pad Y of 20, push it down screen a little bit. So with this label, we want to update it every time we hit the increment button to show us exactly what position we have. And you can use this to get the position of anything, even when it's in starting and stopping. But we're just going to do the increment one because that's the easiest. So we can come up here and go my_label.config and set the text equal to, and I'm going to create an F string and go position, and then pass in, this is going to be my_gauge.variable.get. So that will get the current position. That's that variable. And this gets created automatically with the widget, and it keeps track of that automatically. So you can at any time see where your position is in your flood gauge by calling the name of your gauge, .variable, and then .get, sort of like an entry box, .get it, right? So let's go back over here, try this guy again. We're at position 0, let's increment at 1, and it says boom, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. And when it hits 80, boom, it starts over at 0. And again, we can start and stop here. And now it's 34%. If we click it again, boom, 44%. So any position it currently is at, it will keep track of that. So very cool and very interesting. Now, just to make sure here, we can come back over here and make sure that this is a number. It's supposed to be a floating point number, but let's see if we can add 10 to it just to make sure. So if we increment it, boom, now it goes to 20 because it's 10 plus 10, right? So 30, 40, and we're good to go. So it's definitely a number. You could do numbery things with it. You don't have to convert it from a string like sometimes you have to do with things, and that's very cool. So I'm gonna get rid of that. So that's the flood gauge. Pretty cool, fun little widget. And I'm really happy to see these little extra things popping up in TTK Bootstrap, and it makes it a lot of fun to use and all kinds of cool things you can do with this. And that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to look at this calendar widget for TTK Bootstrap, and technically it's called the date entry widget. And I'm going to show you how to use it, how to get information from it, some interesting things you can do with it, and it should be a lot of fun. All right, so I've got a file. I'm just calling it dater.py. And it's our basic TTK Bootstrap starter code that we always have. So we're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB, not as TTK, but as TB, because that's the way I like to do it. And pretty much everything is the same as regular Tkinter. Let's come down here and create a date entry widget. So I'm going to call this my date, and this is going to be a tb.dateEntry widget. We want to put it in root. And just like everything else in TTK Bootstrap, you can give this a boot style and pick any color you want. So, primary, secondary, danger, info, light, dark, all the basic colors that come with TTK Bootstrap. If you're not familiar with those colors, check the previous videos in the series and learn all about that. So I'm just going to do danger. Let's do red, right? And for now, let's just leave it at that. So let's go my_date.pack and give this a pad Y of like 50 to really push it down the screen. So if we save this and run it, head over to our ctkinter.com directory and run Python dater.py, we get this widget, and it's red because we set the boot style to danger, and we click on it. It's got red here, and we can click on a certain thing. And when we do, it updates in this box here. So if we click on the 13th, it updates to the 13th. And that's cool. So one thing to keep in mind is this is basically an entry box. So when we want to get whatever's in here, we have to get the entry box for this widget. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But this is basically it. So this is cool. And we can play around with different settings in this, what the default start date is and things like that. So let's go ahead and look at that. But first, let's say somebody clicks on February 14th. Now it says 2/14/23 here. How do we programmatically get that and do something with it in our program, right? Well, super easy. Let's come back over to our code, and I'm going to create a button. I'm going to call this my_button, and it's going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in a root. We want the text to say get date, something like that. We can give this a boot style of, let's say, danger and outline. So it's red but outlined. And let's give this a command of, I don't know, datey. I don't know, something like that. Whatever. So we don't have this function. We'll go ahead and create it. But first, let's my_button dot pack this guy. Give this pad y of 20, push down the screen a little bit. Finally, let's create a label. So my_label, and this is going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in a root. We want the text to be nothing for now. And let's my_label dot pack this guy and give it a pad y of 20 to push down the screen. Now, maybe we do want to put something here. So let's say you picked something, right? So, okay, we've got these things. Now let's come up here and create that function. So we want to define datey, right? So let's say we want to grab whatever the person selected as the date and update this label with that information. How do we do that? Well, we can grab the date. And to do that, let's go my_label.config. And let's set the text equal to, now I'm going to create an F string. I'm going to say you picked, and then we want to pass in something into this label. And what do we want to pass in? Well, remember we called our calendar my date, so that would be mydate.entry.get. And this is just the .get that you would use for any entry box in Tkinter, right? We're just getting whatever's in there. So let's go ahead and save this and run it, make sure that worked. And back over here, run this guy. So let's say we select, again, 14th, Valentine's Day. It's my birthday coming up. We click get date, and it says you picked 2/14/2023. Now, what exactly is this returning? Is this returning a date time object? What? Well, actually, this is just returning a string. So you can't do date time stuff to it unless you convert it into a date time object, which you can do that if you want. But just keep in mind, this is not an integer. It's not a float. It's just a string of text, right? So, okay, that's cool. Now let's configure this thing a little bit. So by default, it just opens up to whatever date the day is. So today is the 31st of January. So if we, run this guy again, we could see it just says 1/31/23. That's just today's date. So if you want to set a specific date, either when it opens or programmatically or whatever, you could do that. And to do that, let's head back over to our code. And when you define your widget right here, we can set the start date. We can set that equal to something. Now, this is actually a date time object. This is not a string. So in order to use date time stuff, we need to import date from Python. So let's come up here and go from date time. We want to import date. So now we can create date objects and we can use them. So here we just want to call the date function, create a little date object thing. And here we could set the date to whatever we want. Now the format is going to be year. So 2023. Let's say we want the month of 2, which is February, and we want the day of 14. So if we save this and run it, we see by default now it shows up as 2/14/23. If we click this, 2/14/23 is selected. Now, of course, we can still change it to say the 9th. If we click the date, it says, hey, you picked the 9th. So that's cool. So one other thing I want to point out, look at this. It starts on Sunday, right? Sunday is the first one listed in this very first column. Then it goes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We can change that. We can change the default start date. So maybe your calendar, you want it to start on Monday, right? That's not unusual. So how do we get Monday to be the first column? Well, Sunday is technically the 6th day of the week in Python. So it starts at Monday is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, Saturday is 5, Sunday is 6. So we could change what's called the first week day to change that first column. So just up here in our code here where we define our widget, I'm just going to set the first week day to 0. So remember, Monday is 0. It's sort of like a Python list, right? They start at 0. And so in the world of Python, Monday is 0, or at least for this widget, right? So if we want Monday, that's 0. By default, this is going to be 6, which is Sunday, but we want Monday, so just change it to 0. So we save this, head back over here and run it. And we click this. Now we see Monday as the first column listed and Sunday's way over here. So, okay, that's cool. Nice that you can change that very quickly and automatically. All right, so that's basically pretty much all you can do with this, which is very cool already. But let's say you want to, instead of having a thing pop up like this when you click on it, maybe you want a button that you can say, hey, pick the date, and you don't want this whole thing on the screen, but you still want the functionality of this thing. How do you do that? Well, we can do that too. Let's head back over to our code. So up here at the top, we can, from TTK Bootstrap .dialogues. So this is basically a dialog box. We want to import query box, right? So if we save this, now let's come down here and let's create a second button. Let's call this my_button. No, actually, let's just copy all of this because that's going to be easier. So let's change this to my_button2. And here, let's say get calendar, maybe. And instead of danger, let's call this, I don't know, success, just to change the color a little bit. And let's just change the command to thing because I'm being lazy. So now we can come up here and let's define thing. And let's just set some variable. I'm going to call it thing or cal. Let's call it cal, short for calendar. And we could set that equal to just a query box, right? Which is what we imported right here. So now let's update our label. Let's go, actually, let's just grab this and pop this out. Instead of mydate.entry.get, this is going to be cal.get_date. Because up here, we're getting that entry box because this whole date entry widget has sort of been created for TTK Bootstrap, but underlyingly, it uses the date entry TTK widget, right? And that thing, to use it and grab a date, uses this getDate function, right? So we're going to be using that for this query box, so we would call getDate, right? So, okay, that works. Let's go ahead and save this and run it. See what this does. So here we've got this get calendar. When we click it, boom, up pops our own brand new, independent of this thing over here, date entry calendar thing. And you'll notice the color is primary. I'm sure you could mess around with this, change color. I didn't even try, but you would probably want to do that. Or just understand that it's going to be primary, one of the two. So now I'm going to click on January 12th. When I click on that, boom, it updates to 1/12/23. And so we get the date there. We can change it again to the 20th. Boom, it updates to the 20th. Now we can still use this guy up here and February 10th. Click get the date, boom, February 10th. So, whichever of these two methods you want to use, if your program is more suited to have this thing right here pop up on the screen and, just always be present, then use this, right? Totally fine. If you don't want this whole thing up on the screen all the time and you just want to call a calendar whenever you want to call a calendar, then use this second method. Get calendar, boom, up it pops, do your thing, and you're good to go. So that's the date entry widget for TTK Bootstrap. Very cool, super useful, very, very nice looking. I mean, this thing looks great, super useful, super functional, and pretty easy to use. In this video, we're going to look at frames and labels with TTK Bootstrap. Now, this may sound a little boring, but there's a couple cool things here that you're going to want to know about. So it should be pretty cool. So I've got a file. I'm just calling it framer.py. It's our basic TTK Bootstrap starter code that we've always got. Got the theme name set to superhero. And let's come down here and create a frame. So I'm going to call this my_frame. And this is going to be a tb.frame because we're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB. And we just want to put this in root. Now we can give this a boot style equal to all of the other boot style options we've looked at. So you could change the color to danger, primary, secondary, info, success, light, dark, all those things. So I'm just going to start out with light. See how that goes. So let's go my_frame.pack. Give this a pad Y of like 40 or so, really push it down the screen. So, okay, we've got this thing, but there's nothing in it. So let's just put some stuff in it. So let's build a quick entry form. So I'm going to call this my entry, and this is going to be a tb.entry. And we want to put this in my frame. So to put things in frames, you just reference them like that. And let's give this a font of Helvetica and size 18, just to make it bigger so that it expands our frame a little bit. And let's go my_entry dot pack, give this a pad Y of like 20 and a pad X of 20 to push it down the screen inside the frame. Okay, so let's also create a quick button. So let's go my_button, and this is going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in my frame as well. Want the text to say, click me, right? And we can give this a boot style of anything we like. So I'm just going to give this a dark color. And let's give this a command of, I don't know, thing or something like that. We'll create this function in just a second. So let's go my_button dot pack, give this a pad Y of 20 and also a pad X of 20. Okay, so I'm going to come up here real quick and create that function. And for now, we'll just pass. Okay, last but not least, let's create a label. So this video is about frames and labels, and we've got labels in TTK Bootstrap. We've already used them in past videos, but I'm going to talk about them a little bit because there's something cool about them that you're going to want to know about. So let's call this my_label, and this is going to be a tb.label. And let's just put this in root. Let's put it outside of the frame. And let's give this a text of hello there, something like that. And let's also give it a font of Helvetica and a size 18 to make it nice and big. And then let's my_label dot pack this guy and give him a pad Y of 20. So let's just save this and see what we've got so far. So head over to your terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's just run Python framer.py. And when we do, we've got this frame. It's a light colored frame. We've got a button that doesn't do anything. We've got an entry box that doesn't do anything. And we've got a label that just has the default text, which is, in this theme, light colored. So, okay, that's pretty much what we would expect. Now we can change the color of the label. We already know how to do that. We just come down here and let's give it a boot style of anything we want. We could say success if we want, make it horribly green and ugly. Save that, run it. And we've got now green. That's the success color, right? So, okay, that's cool. But we can also do something else with these labels. We can invert them. So that's really kind of cool. So let's come back over here. So we could just give this a boot style of inverse. So INVERSE. So all right, let's go ahead and save that. See how this looks. And now it's inverted. It's got like a little background around it, right? So that's kind of cool, right? So it looks ugly like that, but in this instance, to make it look cooler, I would probably give this a light theme like that. Save that and run it. And now it kind of matches that. That's kind of cool. So this gives you a lot of flexibility to make your app look a certain way if you need it to. And very cool. Now we can also change the color of the frame if we want, which, you know, you probably would want to do that. So instead of light, let's make it dark. Whatever. Go ahead and save it, run it. And you can see now it's dark. That's kind of cool, right? The button kind of disappears, so you would probably want to change the color of your button, change the boot style there. Now you can use all of the boot style colors for both of these labels and frames, like I said. So, you know, info, success, danger, primary, secondary. What are the other ones? Light, dark. There's a couple more. You can check the prior videos in this series to check those out if you're not familiar with them yet. But very cool. Now, one thing I want to mention, a lot of themes have background colors. So you may not be able to match the theme color to the frame. And there are times when you just want a frame to be invisible and you want to be able to do stuff in that frame. For instance, like if we're packing everything on the screen, but we need to grid certain things, I would put them in a frame because then you can grid in a frame, right? We've done this lots of different times. So if that was the case, you just wanted to make it invisible, what you could do is head over to your code and instead of making this a TB frame, just make it a regular Bootstrap frame. Right, so then you just have to get rid of the boot style because regular tkinter frames don't have a boot style. So I'll just comment that out. If we save this, head back over to our terminal and run this. Now we've got the frame, but it's invisible. And we could do things like grid inside of it or whatever you want. So keep in mind, even if you may be using the TTK Bootstrap library, you can still use the stuff from Old Kinter if you want, or TTK if you want too. You just have to import it like normal. So very cool. Those are frames and those are labels. That's pretty much all there is to frames and labels. It's not that exciting, I get it, but very useful. You know, something you're going to use in every app that you ever make. So, thought I'd talk about it. In this video, we're going to look at the menu button, and these are the menu buttons. So We've got, I've got this danger colored one, and we can change the color. I click primary, it changes the primary, secondary, danger, info. We can do outlines. That looks pretty cool. Outline secondary, outline danger. And you can see the little text updates every time I click something. So that's what we're going to look at in this video. So I've got some starter code. We've always got. I'm calling it menu_button.py. And we're using the superhero theme for TTK Bootstrap. We've imported the library right there. And here we go. So how do we build these things? Well, they're a little complicated, but not too bad. So I'm just going to create a variable. I'm going to call it my_menu. And this is going to be a tb.menu button. And it's TB because I've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. And we want to put this guy in root. Let's give it a boot style of like warning. I think that's orange maybe. I don't know, whatever. And then let's give it some text and let's just have it say things. I don't know. This is the text that's going to appear before you click on anything. So before it's opened or clicked on, that's the text that'll show up. So things, right? Whatever. So then let's my_menu. .pack, and let's give this a pad Y of like 20 to really push it down the screen. So let's save this and run it just to see if that worked. Should have. So let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run Python menu_button. And when we do, we get things. When we click on it, nothing happens because we haven't told it to do anything yet. So, okay, that looks good. Head back over here, and I'm going to push this down a little bit, give it a 50 instead of a 20. Okay, so we've got this guy, but now there's nothing inside of it. Now to put things inside of our menu button, we need to create basically a little menu inside of our menu button. So let's create basic menu and call this anything you want, but I'm going to call it inside_menu because, if we called it menu, is it the menu button? Is it the menu? It's complicated. So I'm just going to call it inside menu because it's inside of our menu button, but call it anything you want. So this is going to be a tb.menu, and then we need to pass in my_menu, which is just what we named our menu button up here, right? This whole thing. So, okay, that looks good. Now we can add items to our inside menu, right? So first, these are supposed to have variables assigned to them. I don't use the variable because I just find you don't need to. We have to add a label. We can use the label as the variable. But if you need to use a variable, you call this anything you want. I'm going to call it item_variable because, it's an item we're adding to the menu. And then we just give this a string var, right? This is just a Kinter string var variable thing, right? You're probably familiar with those. So now we need to create a list of items that we want to put in our menu and then sort of loop through that list and add them to our menu. So let's do that with a for loop. So let's go for X, call it anything you want. And now let's just create our Python list of things we want. So I want to put different colors in there, different boot styles. So when we click on it, we can change it. So we'll start out with adding primary. We could do secondary, like that. We can do danger. That's the red color. We could do info. You can also change these to be outline instead of solid. So let's go outline primary and outline secondary. I'll just do a few of these because it's pretty boring. So outline, say danger maybe. And outline info. That's good enough. So we need a colon at the end of this because we're looping, right? This is a for loop. There we go. Now, what are we doing as we loop? Well, we're adding things to our inside_menu. And what are we doing? We're adding actually a radio button. You can add a check button, but that gets a little goofy. We want a radio button because we only want to select one thing at a time. So, all right, add a radio button. And then we're giving them a label of X, which is what each of these are, right? And now if you want to give the variable, you can add the variable of our item_var. I never really use that, but if you wanted to, you could, and that would be how you do it. So, okay, that looks good. So the last step, we need to sort of associate the menu with the menu button. So let's associate the inside menu with the menu button. So to do that, we just call my_menu, which is the name of our, menu button. And then inside of here, we're going to assign the menu to it. And what menu are we going to assign? We're going to inside our inside underscore menu. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this and run it, see if that worked. We ran through that pretty quickly. So Python menu button.py. And now when we click on this, boom, we see each of these things. Very cool. But when we click on them, nothing happens. So how do we get it? Well, it does put a little checkbox next to it. So that's fun. So how do we get it to where, when we click on a thing, it does something? Well, that's a little tricky, but it's not too bad. Now, normally we would come over here and we would assign a command equals something. So let's come up here and create a command called stuff, right? And what do we want to do? Well, we want to take whatever X that we clicked on and pass it into here as an X. And we want to do something with it, right? Well, normally you would call stuff, but we also want to pass in that X, right? Well, whenever you want to pass things in to a function from a button, which is essentially what this is, in Tkinter, you can't just do that. You need to create a lambda. So if we create a lambda, Lambda, and now I know this looks like a capital L, but it's actually a lowercase, you would think that this would work, but it doesn't, and I'll show you why. So let's come up here and let's just print X. Or better yet, let's come down here and create a label real quick. So I'm just going to call this my underscore label. This is going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in root. We want the text to equal nothing right now. And then let's my underscore label dot pack this guy and give it a pad Y of like 40 to really push it down the screen. But now let's come up here and let's configure our label. So my underscore label dot config. And we want to set the text equal to X for now, right? So let's run this and see what happens. This is not going to actually work. So here, when we click on primary, boom, it's outline info, which is the last thing. If we click on secondary, boom, it's outline info, which is the last thing. Why? Well, think about it. As this thing is looping, it adds X into our function up here. Well, it does it for primary. Primary gets passed in. Then it does it for secondary. Secondary gets passed in. Danger, info, outline, outline, until it comes to the very last thing, outline info. It passes it into the function, and then boom, X becomes outline info. Now, we don't want that. It's overriding all the older ones that went in. So how do we change that? Well, super easy. We just come up here and let's, inside of here, say X equals X. That's all we have to do. That should fix this. So here, I'm going to make a little F string, and I'm going to say you selected X. Okay, so let's save this and run it and see if that works. It should. So now when we click this thing, when I click primary, boom, it says you selected primary. When I click info, it says, boom, you selected info. When I select outline danger, boom, you selected outline danger. Now this doesn't update yet. We have to change that, but at least we're passing the right thing. And this is why I don't use a variable with this. Why do we need a Tkinter variable? We've got the label. We can do things based on that label if we want. We could do any logic we want. So that's just my rant. Finally, we want to change our my underscore menu. We want to .config it. We want to set the boot style to X. So that will change the actual color, because when we defined our menu button, we set the boot style to warning. So here we can update that boot style with whatever we clicked on in the button, in the dropdown. And so that should be fun. So let's run this guy one more time, see if all this worked. So now we click primary, boom, it changes to blue primary. Secondary, danger, info. We got the outlines. I like the outlines the best. I think those look pretty good. So outline primary, outline secondary, outline danger, like that one, and outline info. So that's it. That's menu button. Now you can play around with the size of the text and the colors of the background and the foreground and all that using a regular style widget. And I've got videos on style widgets earlier in the playlist. I think the button video we did, we also talked about style. So you can watch that if you want to change the backgrounds of these things. But yeah, pretty cool and pretty easy. So that's menu button with TTK Bootstrap, and that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to look at the meter widget in TTK Bootstrap. This thing is awesome and very customizable. We could do all kinds of stuff with this. You can see I've got it going up to 120%. You could change that to whatever you want. You can see there's the sort of dotted outline. You could also make that solid. You could change the color. You could change the text. You can increment it by any amount. Here I've got 5%. You can step up by any amount. Here I've got 10%. Step down. You can do it by buttons. You could do it by dragging and dropping, and that's what we're gonna look at in this video. All right, so I've got a file, I'm just calling it meter.py, and it's our basic TTK Bootstrap starter code that we always have. And you can see we're using the superhero theme. We've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB, and the rest is just basic stuff. So, all right, let's go ahead and create a meter. So I'm gonna call this my_meter, and this is a tb.meter widget. And again, we're calling tb. Because we've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. Now inside of here, there are tons of attributes that you can play around with. So just to get started, we want to put this in root, and let's give this a boot style of like danger to make it red. And again, all your TTK Bootstrap colors are available here. So primary, secondary, danger, info, success, light, dark, all the other ones are available. So okay, let's just my_meter.pack this guy. Let's give this a pad Y of 50 to really push it downstream. Now, one thing you're probably definitely gonna want is the subtext. So let's go subtext equals, and I'm just gonna say tkinter learned. This is a meter on how much tkinter we have learned. So let's go ahead and save this and just see what we have right out of the box here. So let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python meter.py. And when we do, we get this empty circle with a 0 in it. It says tkinter learned. So, okay, if I click on this, nothing actually happens. So we don't have much going on here. If I click on this, nothing happens. So first, let's play around with being able to click on this and drag and drop. You have to specifically set that up. So let's come here, and I'm just gonna put all these things on separate lines so they're easier to read. And to do that, we type in interactive. So do we wanna make it interactive? Yes, we do, right? So let me just do this because we're gonna do a lot of these. So let's save this and run this and see what we have here. So now when I click on this, I can drag it and drop it. And you can see by default, it goes up to 100. And that's very cool. So if I leave it off, it just, stays where it is. So, all right, that's interesting. What if we want something next to the number? So 75, maybe we want to make this 75%, or maybe on the left side, we want to put a $sign. What do we do to change basically the label inside, the main label? Well, we could do that. We can just change the text right to anything we want. So if I wanted a percentage, we could do that. We could also do text left, if we wanted a $sign, we could do that. So if we save this and run it, you can see in tiny little text, we get this $sign and percentage sign. And you could play around with the font size. And we'll look at that in maybe a minute. But I'm gonna take off that $sign because that's silly. But just keep in mind, that's how you would put that. That would be text left, obviously. So I'm just gonna comment this one out. So we can create a meter type. By default, this is set to full. We can also have it semi. So let's go ahead and save this. Take a look at what this looks like. And here you see it's not all complete, right? It's just semi. So that's a little weird. I'm gonna go ahead and put it back to full, but I'm also gonna comment can be semi, right? We can play around with the stripe thickness. And I'm just gonna set this to, let's say 10. If we run this, now we get the sort of dashes, right? So that's cool. I really like the look of that. And again, you can change this to any number you want. We could do, 50 to make it really, well, let's just say really big. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Whatever. Maybe you want just 5, make it real skinny. Right? So you get these like almost tick marks. That's cool. Personally, I like 10, but anything you want, you can do that. We can change the meter size. So let's send this to 200. If we save this, well, let's change it to 400, make it really big. You can see, whoa, we've got a really big meter size now, right? So that's cool. Likewise, you can make it smaller by just, making it smaller. So I'm gonna put this at 200 or so. Save this, run it, go. Very nice, and just that easy. We can give this thing some padding, right? So let's go padding equals, and let's just blow it out. Let's say 50. Can't really tell the difference. Maybe it's padding on the outside, probably. So leave that at 50. We can set the amount used. So let's say we'll set it to 20. This is sort of like the default, what it is when it starts right up. All right, so by default, boom, it's just already at 20, right? So that's interesting. We can also change the amount total. And let's say I put it at 150. So before we had it at 100%. Now it's 150 is as high as it'll go. So if we run this, you can see it's still at 20 by default. If I drag it all the way up, 130, 140, all the way up at the top is 150, right? Personally, I would always keep it at 100 because, you're usually doing like 100%. A lot of times when you're using a meter of some sort, it's a percentage. But if you need it for any other thing, that's how you do that. And very cool. Now, there are lots of other things you can play around with this very quickly. Let's head over here to the documentation. We could go ttkbootstrap.readthedocs.io. If you click on the style guide, it's not that useful. Come down here to meter. It just shows you basically the basic functionality. So I should mention you could also change the subtext color, and that's just with subtext style. So let's just come down here, give it a subtext style of, let's say, I don't know, success, something like that. Save this, run it. And now the subtext is that green success color. That is hideous, right? So let's just give this, I don't know, let's call it dark. Or let's say light. I think that's maybe by default with this theme. Yeah. So by default, that's light colored. Very cool. So like I said, there's not much stuff right here, but if you want the information on this, you can go to the API section up here and then come down here in the widgets module, click on meter, and then here we get the API documentation, which is much more complete. So these are all the things you could play with. So arc range, you could do amount total, we did that, amount used, widget size, meter size, boot style, we did that, meter type, full or semi, we did that, meter thickness, we did that. Show text, interactive, we looked at that. Stripe thickness, we looked at that. Text left, text right. Text font, if you want to change the font size for the text in the center, you could use that. Subtext, we use that. Subtext style, we just did that. Subtext font, again, you could change the size of that if you want. So dash size 10. And then we have step size. We'll take a look at that in just a second. So pretty straightforward. That's how to make it look certain ways. Now, how do we actually use this? So let's say I drag this around and I end on 78. I need to know that it's at 78 programmatically. How do I do that? How do I know what it's at? Further, how can I change it by maybe clicking on a button to increment it a certain amount? How can we do that? Well, let's take a look at that now real quick. Super easy. And let's come down here and let's create some buttons. So I'm gonna call my_button, and this is gonna be a tb.button. We wanna put it in root. We want the text to say, click me, and let's say 5, right? So we want to click it and move the thing 5. So let's give this a command of clicker. I don't know. And let's my_button.pack this guy, give it a pad Y of 20, push it down the screen a little bit. And now let's create this clicker function. Now, first, there's a couple of different ways. You could step it up or down, or you could set the amount used attribute of the widget. So if we want to just create a counter real quick, let's go global counter. And let's also just really quickly set this up here, global counter. And let's set the counter equal to 5 or something to start out with. And then inside of here, let's say my_meter.configure. And then we want to set the amount used to our counter. And then every time we click it, we want to increment our counter. So let's go plus equals 5, right? Now, if we want to keep track of that, let's keep track on the button. So let's my_button.configure, and let's set the text equal to, and let's create an F string, and let's say click me. And then inside of here, let's pass my_meter. So to see what the meter is actually set on at any given time, you can call the amount used var. So this is a variable, and this needs to be a period. So this is a variable, sort of like a Kinter variable that will keep track of this. So to get it, we need to .get the amount used var. So, okay, that looks pretty good, except, this should be amount used, not amount user. All right, so let's go ahead and save this and run it, see how this looks. Okay, so we started at 20, we want to click me 5, boom, it goes to 5%. Now it does not go to 25 because we just didn't program it to do that. We could easily have set the counter at 20 to start with and then incremented at 5, but we didn't do that. Anyway, you get the idea. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, all the way up. Now, if we hit 100 and keep going, this will just keep going. So it keeps spinning, right? So we can programmatically fix that if we want. And also let's set our counter at 20, just because. And then to fix that, we would just come into our thing here and let's just say what? Let's go if counter is less than or equal to 100, then do all this stuff. And I'm just going to tab it all over. All right, that looks good. So let's save this and run it. We start at 20, boom, it goes to 25, 30, all the way up to 95, 100. We keep clicking at 100, it doesn't go past 100. So that's one way you can do that. So that's how to sort of increment it manually if you just want to set the amount used. And you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's sometimes you probably would want to do that, but there are even better ways to do that. We can step. So let's grab this and let's copy and paste a couple more buttons in here. And I'm going to call this my button 2 and my button 3. So then here as our text, instead of click me 5, let's say step up. And here, instead of click me 5, let's say step down. And let's give this a command of up. And let's give this one a command of down. So, all right, let's go up and create these two functions. So let's define up and let's define down. So here we can step up in any amount. So let's just go my_meter dot step. And then inside of here, we pass however many places we want to step. So if we want to step 10, we could just do it like that. Same thing with down. It's the exact same process. Instead of 10 though, it's, let's say we want it to go -10, right? Just that easy and kind of all there is to it. Now let's make this a little bit bigger so these all fit. 570, let's come back over here and let's see, let's run this guy. Now one weird thing about the steps, that still didn't quite fit. We started at 20. If we step up from here, it'll go backwards. So now it goes 10, 5, it's 0, now it'll go forward again in steps. So just sort of keep that in mind. So if we run this again and we want to step down, again, it goes the opposite direction. So if we start, actually, let's just start at 0 here, just to make this easier to follow. So amount used, let's put this at 0. Okay, so now if we run this guy again, and again, not quite big enough. So if we step up, boom, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and then it just goes back down again, right? So we're stepping up, now we can step down, boom. And this one, once it hits 0, it keeps going negative, right? So again, you could programmatically change this with an if statement like we just did with the first function. I'll leave that to you guys. So very cool, right? And even when we're stepping up and down, we can still grab this guy and move it around, right? And as always, you can still always, no matter which one of these you use, you can always find whatever the current thing is. Like for instance, right now it's at 82. We can always grab that just by referencing this amount used var and then getting it like that. So very cool and a lot of fun. I don't know about you guys, but this is one of the things that makes me really like TTK Bootstrap. It's these little things that have been added that aren't a part of regular Tkinter. This meter thing is really cool. I mean, you can do all kinds of cool stuff with this, and it's really easy to use and very configurable. As we could see, we could change all kinds of stuff with this, and it's pretty easy to use. In this video, we're going to be looking at notebook tabs with TTK Bootstrap. And this is what we're doing here. We've got these little tabs here, and on each one we can have different stuff and we can style them different ways and all that good stuff. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So we've got our basic starter code that we've always got. I'm calling it mb.py, and we're importing TTK Bootstrap. We've pip installed that obviously, and we're using the superhero theme. So let's come down here and create our notebook. Now these things are tabs, but it's called a notebook, so it's kind of weird. We're just going to name this my_notebook. And this is going to be a tb.notebook. And it's TB here because we're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB. And we just want to put this in our root window. And let's give this a boot style of, and I'm going to give this a boot style of dark. Now you could use all your boot style colors for this: primary, secondary, info, success, danger, dark, light, and all of that. So keep that in mind. And that's really all we need to do. Now let's my_notebook.pack this guy. And I'm gonna give this a pad Y of like 20 to kind of push it down the screen a little bit. So the trick to this thing is you add frames as the tabs, right? So you create a frame, you put whatever you want in that frame, and then you add that frame to the notebook. So let's create a frame. I'm gonna call it tab1, right? And this is gonna be a tb.frame. You can also use a regular Tkinter frame, but it's gonna be Tkinter colored. So we wanna use tb.frame. And we want to put this in my_notebook. So I'm going to copy this and let's create a second one, and I'm going to call it tab 2. So we've got these 2 frames. Now we just need to put stuff in them. So let's just play around with this. I'm going to create a label, and this is going to be a label. We want to put it in tab 1, right? So the text is going to say my awesome label, right? It's a very awesome label. And, just for fun, let's give this a font of, and let's say Helvetica, and like a size of 18 to make it nice and big. And then we could just my_label.pack this guy. And let's give this a pad Y of like 20, push it down screen inside the frame a little bit. And then we could play around with this. Let's create a text box. I don't know, this is going to be my text, and it's going to equal a regular text box. Now notice this is not a TTK Bootstrap text box, just a regular text box. That's fine. We can put it in tab 1 as well. And I don't know, let's give it a width of like 70 and a height of like 10, just to sort of expand it a little. And again, we can my_text.pack this guy. And I'm going to give it a pad Y of like 10, maybe a pad X of 10 too, just for fun. Mix it up. And finally, let's create a button, just one little button. And this is going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in tab 1 again. And we want the text to say, click me, or something like that. And let's give this a boot style of like danger and outline. So it'll be red outlined. Okay. And then finally, let's my_button.pack this guy and give it a pad Y of like 20 to push it down screen a little bit. So we've got our first tab, our first frame filled out. Now let's create our second one. And I'm not going to be as elaborate with the second one. Let's just create a label. In fact, I'm just going to come up here and copy this guy. And instead of calling it my label, let's call it my label 1, or probably my label 2 would make more sense. And then this is going to say, this is tab 2. Woo, right? Capitalize that. And instead of putting it in tab 1 right here, let's put it in tab 2. So, okay, that looks good. Now let's add our frames to the notebook. Now we haven't added them yet. So we've got this tab 1 and tab 2. And to add them, we call my_notebook.add. And then we just say, hey, tab 1. And we want to give this some text. So I'm just going to say tab 1. Let me copy this guy, paste it again, call tab 2. And on this one, we're going to call tab 2. Right? And that's it. So this text is the little text that's going to be on the little tab at the top of our notebook, the little panel thing. So there we go. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python nb.py, and boom, here we go. So we've got tab 1 and tab 2. Inside of tab 1, we've got our label, we've got our text field, we've got our button that doesn't actually do anything, but it looks good. In tab 2, we have just some text that says this is tab 2. Now, I've got this set to the dark theme for this notebook, and this looks pretty good, right? So when you click a tab, it highlights. Otherwise, it's sort of muted and dark. I like that, but you can use all of your boot styles. So if we come up here to where we define this thing, instead of dark, if we want to say info, for instance, I don't really like the boot style colors with this, and you'll see why here. See, here it is. Now it looks like tab 2 is highlighted. Like we've selected tab 2, but we haven't. It's the one that hasn't been selected yet, but it's the one with color. So it doesn't really make sense. When we click on it, we're now on tab 2. It says this is tab 2, but tab 1 is the one that sort of looks like it's highlighted. So it's very confusing. And it's not just this boot style, it's any of them that you pick. So if we change this to danger, for instance, we're going to get the same sort of weird thing going on. The non-tabbed tab is the one that's highlighted, which, is kind of weird. So I sort of keep that in mind. I get around that myself by just using, dark or light. It's still going to get the same thing with light if we see here. Let's look at this, but it's not quite as bad, right? We click on this. It still, in my mind, isn't great. Now, you might be thinking, what if we call like danger outline? What happens there? Well, we get an error. So you can't do that. It would be kind of fun if you did, if you could, but no. So I'll keep this at dark. Go ahead and save this. We'll take one more look at this. I think that looks pretty good. And very neat. In this video, we're gonna look at progress bars, and they're very similar to the floodgate we looked at a few videos ago. And you can see we've got this progress bar. I've got it set to striped. You could also set it to solid, and we've got it sort of the green color, and we can increment a few things at a time. We can stop, we can do auto every second. Boom, boom, I've got it moving 20, and that's kind of cool. We can just go automatically, zoop like that. It keeps going and going. All kinds of cool things you could do with this, and that's what we're gonna look at in this video. So I've got some basic starter code. I'm calling it pb.py, short for progress bar, I guess. And we're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB. I've pip installed that. And we're using this superhero theme, so it's that sort of dark theme. So, okay, let's just come down here and create a progress bar. I'm gonna call it my progress. And this is gonna be a tb.progress bar. And it's tb. Because up here we imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. So there we go. And now there's all kinds of different attributes you can use for this thing. We'll just sort of start walking through all of them here. We want to put this in root. We want to give this a boot style of, anything you want. So let's say danger. That's the red color. You can use all your TTK Bootstrap colors for this. So primary, secondary, info, success, danger, light, dark, all the rest of them. So we'll just do danger. That's that red one. And that's solid. You can do striped if you want, just by passing in a striped. But for now, let's just do solid, see how that looks. Now, like I said, we can change all kinds of things here. So we can start out by setting the maximum length. So let's go maximum. And let me just put these all on separate lines so we can read them easier. And I just want to make this 100. If you wanted to make it 200, that's the maximum sort of number it can go to. So from 0 to 200, from 0 to 100, whatever. I'm just going to put 0 to 100. We can also change the mode. So just like the flood gauge thing we looked at a few videos ago, we can set the mode. Now the default is determinate and the other option is indeterminate. We'll look at both of those. We'll set it to determinate for now. You don't have to put the mode on there. If you don't put the mode, it'll just be determinate by default, but we're gonna play with it, so I'm gonna put it on there. And let's see, what else do we got? We can change the length of it, like how physically big it is. So I want to say length equals, let's say make it 200, nice and sort of long. Now that's not to be confused with the maximum. So it might be a length of 200, like, that big versus a length of 100 versus a length of 50. So it's 200, but it still only goes to 100. It's just the bar will be physically bigger, right? And we can set the value to start with. So if we want to set this to like 20 right out the box, we could do that. So let's go ahead and my_progress. .pack this guy, give it a pad Y of like 40, really push it down the screen. Let's just save this and run it, see what we got here. So we head over to my terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python pb.py. And when we do, we get this solid red bar. You can see it's 20 because we set the value to 20. So it's already got 20 on there. And you can see it's, yay length. So that's kind of cool. We can make it bigger. We can make it smaller. So that's cool. So let's come back here very quickly and let's just change this just so you see to 300, and let's set the value to 0 by default. Run this guy again. See, now it's much longer. The length of it is an additional 100. So that just makes it bigger. So, okay. Now what can we do with this thing? So let's create some buttons. So first I'm going to create a frame real quick to put these buttons in. So let's call this my_frame. This is going to be a tb.frame. And we want to just put it in root. And then let's my_frame.pack this guy. Give him a pad Y of like 20, push it down the screen a little bit. So let's say frame, and let's say progress bar. And then let's come down here and create some buttons. So I'm gonna call this my_button. This is gonna be a tb.button. We wanna put it in my_frame. And let's have the text say increment 20. And let's give this a boot style of, I don't know, info, make it blue or something. I don't know. And let's also give this a command of increment. So let me copy this. We'll need to create this function in a second. And for now, let's my_button.grid this guy. So we'll grid this in the frame and we'll give it a column of 0 and a row of 0. And for good measure, let's give this a pad X of 10 to space it apart from the other buttons we're about to create. So let's come up here and let's create this function. Let's say increment 20. And so I'm going to define increment. Now let's say we want to increment this by 20. Now there's a couple of different ways to do it. And I'm going to suggest an alternate way than the sort of standard way you might think. So the standard way is just to call myProgress.step and then say how much you want to increment it. So we could just do that. This doesn't work great though, as we'll see here. So let's come back over here. Let's run this guy. So our button is blue. If we click this, boom, it goes up 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Oh, it goes back to 0. It doesn't stay at 100 when you use step. And to me, that's kind of annoying. When it gets to the end, I want it to stay filled out at the end so I can see it's done, right? It's just sort of in my mind, that should be the way it works. It shouldn't just go back to 0. It's very unsatisfying, right? You get to 80 and then instead of boom, all the way closing, it just disappears. So I don't love this. So I tend to not use the step method here. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. What you can do is call the value. So let's go my_progress and then pass in the value attribute. And then we could just plus equal 20. So it takes whatever the value is currently, starts out at 0, and it adds 20 to that. So if we save that, come back over here, run this guy. Now, every time we click this, it's just going to add 20, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. It gets to the end. It's all filled out. It looks great. I like it to be filled out at the end like that. That just makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you? It should be filled out at the end. So I tend to use this method. Now, it's pretty cool and it's pretty easy. Now, let's create a quick label down here so that we can get the current value. So let's come down here and let's just create a label. And I'm going to call this my_label. And this is going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in root. We want the text to equal nothing to begin with. And we'll just leave the boot style off for now because we don't really care what it looks like. And let's .pack this guy, give him a pad Y of 20 to push down screen a little bit. So now if we want to output what the current value of our progress bar is, how could we do that? Well, we can come up here and let's just get current value. So that's going to be my_label.config. And we want to set the text equal to whatever our current myProgressBar is. And we just pass in that same value attribute, right? So every time we click the button, it will increase it by 20 and then output that onto the screen. So if we save this and run it, so we get boom, it says 20 down there, 40, 60, 80, 100. Very cool. Now, I can barely read that, so we're going to make this a little bigger just for fun. Let's come down here and let's give this guy a font equal to like Helvetica and size 18. So, okay, that's cool. So that's just increasing it, by a certain amount, right? So we've set it to 20. We can set this to any number we want, 10, 5, 1, 0. Well, not 0, but you get the idea. So very cool. Very quickly, let's change this to 120. So the maximum is 120 just to sort of differentiate this and the length, right? So if we run this real quick, we're just going to see, of course, the length of it's the same, but now it goes 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, right? So the maximum is changed. So I just wanted to point that out in case there's any confusion there. I'm going to change this back to 100. So, all right, what else can we do? Well, we can have this thing automatically start and just go. Before we do that, though, let's look at this determinant thing, right? So if you want to do indeterminate, what this will do is, well, one, it'll change the shape of it. And let's change this from danger to danger striped, just for fun. It'll change the shape of the progress bar, how it's filled. It'll just make a little line, but it'll also continue. So once you get to 100, it'll then go back down again. So indeterminate means it goes up and down, which you may want for certain things. So if we run this, we could see that. Right off the bat, you can see it's different because it starts out with something. And then 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Click it again, boom, goes down to 120, 140, 160, 180. It just keeps adding, right? Because we're adding in our function. If you wanted to have it hit 100 and then go back down to 0, you could do some logic to do that. I don't think we're going to do that. That's basic logic. You would do that in here. Once you just run an if statement, if value equals 100, then, instead of this plus equal 20, it would be minus equal 20, right? So you could do that, but you get the idea. So, okay, that's determinate. Kind of weird. I don't use it all that much, but there are certain circumstances you may need to use it. So what else can we do? Well, let's have a button where we can click it and it just goes, right? It just kind of like starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all the way up to 100 very quickly. So let's come down here. I'm going to create this. I'm going to grab this button And let's go, let's grab a couple of these. So I'm going to go my button 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. We'll set this one to say auto. And let me take this command off for now. This one will be stop. And this one will be start. And again, let me take this command off. And for start, let's create a command called start. And we'll create this function in just a second. We also need to change these columns. So this will be column 1, column 2, and column 3. So, okay, let's come up here and let's create just start. So let's define our start function. And here we could call our progress bar. So my progress, and then we could just say dot start. And then we can pass in the increments that we want it to move. So let's say 10, right? So if I save this and run it, and I click start, it goes all the way up. And then we're still in indeterminate. So it just will keep going back and forth, right? So if we close this, let's change this back to determinate. Save this and run it. Now when we click start, it just goes zoop, and it keeps going. Now you could set some logic in here that says, hey, if it ever hits 100, stop. But I'll leave that to you. How do we get it to stop if we want to? We've got this stop button. It doesn't do anything. Well, let's look at that right now. So let's come down here to our start button, or to our stop button, and let's give this a command of stop. We come up here. Let's create a stop function. So we define stop. And to stop this guy, we just call my_progress dot stop. Pretty simple. So if we save this and run it, we can start it and boom, stop. It just goes back to 0. Start, stop. Same thing here. We can increment 20, 40, 60, 80. We click stop, boom, it goes back to 0. Now this doesn't update after that because our stop function doesn't have that on there, but you could put that in there if you wanted. I suppose you could just grab this and output it right there. So very cool and pretty easy. Now, what if you wanted to auto increment at a certain interval based on a certain time? Well, we could do that. Let's come up here to this auto button and let's create a command called auto. And to do this, we're going to use the Python time library. So let's import time. It just comes with Python. We don't have to install it or anything. We can just import it. And let's come down here and let's auto. So define auto. And I'm going to create a for loop. So let's go for x in a range of, say, 5. So we want to do 20 increment blocks. So 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. There's 5 of those in 100, right? So we're going to loop through 5 times, right? So we can just grab this guy right here and paste him in. So that will do that. And we also probably want to output our current value. So we'll do that. And then we can time dot sleep, and we want this to happen every second. Now, if we run this, this isn't actually going to work. Let's see if we run this. So if we click auto, it just sort of the whole program freezes until it finishes. So in 5 seconds, boom, there it goes. Now that's not what you want at all. We want to see the progress as it goes, right? So to do that, we have to call something. I don't know if I've talked about this. Definitely not on this channel. We can call root.update_idle tasks. And this is just a function that will do what it says. It will update the idle tasks. So instead of waiting till the thing is completely done, it'll do them one at a time. So we could say update one at a time, not all at once, or something like that. And here we could say increment 1 second. Time, whatever. So now if we save this and come back over here, it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every second, boom, it will do that. So that's kind of cool. I like that. When we stop, it still does that. Here we can, still does it like that. And this starts over as well. Just keeps going as you click it. You're going to want to put some logic in there that stops it at 100. I'll leave that to you. That's trivial. So very cool, very easy to use. Not a whole lot of options here. You set the maximum, you set the length, you set the current value. You can get this value anytime you want just by calling value like this. And you can assign things to that value just by using a assignment operator like any old Python. And you can set this mode to determinate versus indeterminate, whatever floats your boat. And very cool. In this video, we're going to look at radio buttons for TTK Bootstrap. Now we're going to look at the actual buttons, these round things. We're also going to look at radio buttons, like the actual buttons here. So you can click and it'll go from one to the other. They act in the same way as radio buttons, but they look like actual buttons. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So I've got some basic starter code that we've always got. I'm calling it rad.py, short for radio, I guess, radio button, whatever. We're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB. I've pip installed that already. And we're using the superhero theme. So let's come down here. There's a few different ways to make radio buttons, and I'll show you a couple different ways in this video. But I like to create a Python list that'll have all the things that I want to make buttons for, and we just loop through that and create buttons for each one. But I'll show you a more manual way to do it also later on in this video. So let's create radio button list. So I'm going to create a list called toppings, and this is going to be, I don't know, pizza toppings or something. So let's go pepperoni, and we'll just do a few of these. We also want cheese pizza, and we also want, what, veggie pizza, something like that. So it's just a basic Python list, nothing really interesting to see here. But now we also need to create a tkinter variable, keep track of everything. So we want to know when you click on a button, which button you've clicked on. So we need a tkinter variable for that. And tkinter has these special variables. You can have string vars or int vars. We're going to use a string var for this. So I'm going to call this my underscore topping, and we're going to set this equal to a string var, just like that. And that's all there is to it. So now let's loop through the list and create radio buttons. So let's go for topping in toppings, right? So remember, toppings is our Python list. We're going to loop through it for each topping in there. What do we want to do? Well, let's create a tb.radio button. And notice the B in button is lowercase. I have a tendency to want to make it uppercase, but it's lowercase. And we want to put this in root. And now we have to pick a boot style. And just like everything in TTK Bootstrap, you can use all your basic boot styles. So primary, secondary, info, danger, dark light, all the things. So let's create, let's do danger. So danger is red, so we'll create red ones. And then now we need to set a variable. Well, we know what our variable is. We've defined it right here as my topping. So let's pop that in there. Now we also want to designate the text. What is going to say on the actual radio button itself? What text should it be? Well, I think it should be topping, right? So for pepperoni, it'll say pepperoni. For cheese, it'll say cheese. For veggie, it'll say veggie. Now, like I said, there's lots of different ways you can do this. You can use a list of tuples and then, have a different name and a different thing, so instead of pepperoni, it might be pepperoni and 1 cheese and 2 veggie and 3, so you might put the name here and the variable there. Like I said, there's lots of different ways to do radio buttons. They all work with Bootstrap. So we're going to do it this way. And we also need to set the value. The value will also be topping. So whenever somebody clicks on it, what do we put in this variable? Well, we put whatever that topping is, right? So my topping, the variable, will become pepperoni. My topping, the variable, will become cheese, etc. So, okay, that looks good. Now, we can also .pack this right here if we want. Give this a pad Y like 20 to push down the screen a little bit. And that looks good. Now, notice we didn't name this. We didn't go like my underscore button equals like we normally would. Since we're looping through here, we don't need to do that. And since each of these have a variable, we don't need to distinguish between each one. They're all going to be the same, right? So if we click on one, that means definitionally the other ones can't be clicked on. That's what a radio button is. You can only click on one at a time. So we could do it this way. So, okay, that looks good. Now, there's a couple of different ways to figure out which one you've clicked on. You can either create a button, and then whenever you click that button, it'll sort of like submit it, and then you can do something, or you can add a command right to the radio button. We're going to do both here just so I could show you kind of how to do that. So let's create button, and let's just call it my underscore button. This is going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in root. We want the text to say something like, click me, right? And let's give this a command of clicker, right? So we're going to click the button and run this clicker function. So before we do that, let's my underscore button dot pack this guy, put it on the screen, give it a pad Y20 to kind of push it down the screen a little bit. So while we're at it, let's also create a label so we can output, when we click on something, we can output it onto the screen. Hey, you clicked on whatever, pepperoni, right? So I'm gonna call this my_label. It's gonna be a tb.label. We want it to be in root, and we want the text to start out saying, you selected nothing, right? So then let's go my_label.pack, give this guy a pad y 20 to push down screen a little bit. Okay, so now we've got this clicker function we need to create. So let's come up here and create it. So let's go clicker function, and let's define clicker. And here we just want to change the label. So let's go my_label.config, and we want the text to say, let's create an F string, and let's say you selected, and then let's put in a variable. So what variable? Well, it's this variable right here, right? Our string var variable. So we want to my_toppings.get this, right? And that's a function, so put your brackets there. So that's all there is to it. Let's go ahead and save this and run it, make sure that worked. So head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python rad.py. And when we do, we get pepperoni, cheese, veggie. That looks good. You selected nothing. When I click on veggie, you can see it's red because we selected danger. The boot style of danger is red, right? Now, if we click this button, it says you selected veggie, and we're good to go. That's all there is to it. So cheese, pepperoni. So that's awesome, very easy. But what if you don't want to use a button, right? What if you just want to click cheese and have it automatically update? Well, very, very simple. So let's come down here, and right here in our button, we've given it a command of clicker. We can just take that thing and apply it to the radio button itself. So come up here inside of our radio button, pop that in there, command equals clicker, save it, head back over here, run this guy one more time. And now when we click cheese, boom, it says you selected cheese. Very cool, you selected pepperoni. So just depending on the flow of your program, what you need it to do, you might want to have a button. So if somebody's like filling out a form or something and there are other things in the form you want them to fill out, name, email address, whatever, you probably don't want them to click this button and then boom, it submit the form, right? You would want to click this button, select pepperoni, finish filling out the rest of the form, and then click a order button or whatever. Boom, then it says pepperoni. So you could use either way, just depends on what you're doing. So, okay, that's cool. So now we've got these things working. But when it comes to radio buttons, they're actually buttons too. These are nice little round things you could sort of toggle, but you could do the same thing with buttons themselves. So how do we do that? Well, I'll show you how to do that right now. And there's actually two different styles you can use in Bootstrap to do that. So let's come back over to our code. And let's create actual radio buttons. Radio button buttons. There we go. Actual radio button buttons, right? So this is a good way for me to also show you a second method to do radio buttons. You know, up here, we created a list of all of the buttons we wanted, and then we looped through it here. Well, that might be overly complicated if you've only got one or two things you want as your radio button thing. So you might want to just create them manually. So how do you do that? Well, we can do that. I'm going to call it radio button 1 and radio button 2. And we'll just set that equal to a tb.radio button, just like before. And we want to put it in root. Now, we make them into actual buttons with a boot style. So let's set the boot style equal to, and let's change up the color. I'm going to call this info color. But to make it an actual button, we call the tool button boot style, and that will create an actual button. And we have to do the same thing as the other radio buttons. We have to set a variable. So let's set that equal to _topping again, because remember up here we did the same thing, right? We also need to set a text. What is the button going to say? Well, I'm just going to say radio button 1, right? There we go. We also need a value, right? So I'm just going to say radio button 1. And we also need to give this a command of clicker. So when we click on it, we want to run that clicker function, right? So I'm going to copy this whole thing. And we actually also need to rb1.pack this guy, give it a pad y of 20. Now I did this on its own line. You could also do it at the end of it, but I like to do it on their own lines when you're doing them manually. So, all right, let me get rid of that and paste this thing in again. And let's call this RB2. And this is also going to be a tool button. We can also do the second style of TTK Bootstrap tool button. and that is an outline. So I'll show you both of them. This one is just tool button. This is tool button and outline, right? So again, same variable, but instead of radio button 1, we want it to say radio button 2. And for the value, it also wants to be radio button 2. Okay, so let's rb2.pack this guy. Make sure we put him on the screen, give him a pad weight of 20 to push down the screen a little bit. Save this, head back over here, run this guy one more time. And now we have 2 buttons down here, and they're actual buttons. And it's the info color, this sort of light blue. This one is the regular one. It's solid, right? When you hover over it, it changes to dark blue. This one is outline. When you hover over it, it changes like that, but it's outlined otherwise, so that's kind of cool. And the same thing occurs. If we click this one, it says you selected radio button 1, and this one is unselected. If we click this one, boom, it says here radio button 2, and this one gets unselected. Because with radio buttons, you can only have one at a time. Likewise, if we come up here and click cheese, boom, these 2 buttons both become unselected because these are all the same radio button series, I guess you would call it. And again, it says you selected cheese. So veggie, cheese, pepperoni, radio button 1, veggie, radio button 2, cheese, whatever you like, all the different things. And that's all there is to it. So those are radio buttons with TTK Bootstrap. Very simple, very straightforward. Just remember, you use the same sort of functionality as a regular Tkinter radio button. The only real difference is you add a boot style and it changes the color. Otherwise, you just treat them like any other radio button in Tkinter. And there you go. We're going to look at sliders with TTK Bootstrap. And these are technically called scales, but that's silly. It's a slider. I know it's a slider. You know it's a slider. This is a slider, but of course it's called scale. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So you can see we can move this back and forth. And when we do the number changes down here, we can make these horizontal. We can make them vertical. We can change the colors. We can do all kinds of fun things. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So I've got a file. I'm just calling it slider.py because this is a slider, not a scale. It's a scale. But anyway, we've got our basic starter code that we've always got. We've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. I pip installed TTK Bootstrap way back at the beginning of this course. And you can see we're using the superhero theme. So to use a scale, let's just create a scale /slider. I'm going to call them sliders, but they're technically scales. And let's just call this my_scale. And this is going to be a tb.scale. And we want to put it in a root, and we want the boot style to be any of the colors that you want to use. So we've got primary, secondary, warning, info, danger, dark light, all the regular boot styles. And I'm just going to go warning. Now we can set all kinds of different options and attributes for this. We'll get into that in a second. For now, I just want to put this on the screen and take a look at it. So my_scale.pack. Let's give this a pad Y of like 50 to really push it down the screen. So let's head over to our terminal real quick. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python slider.py. And when we do, we get this little slider. It moves back and forth, and it doesn't really do anything right now, but it's on the screen, and it is glorious. We have a slider. So, okay, let's look at some of the attributes we could play around with here. And we can come down here. I'm just going to put a comma and put these each on their own line. First, we can give this a length. Now, I know this kind of looks like a capital L. This is a lowercase l. Sublime just does that. And we can set this to anything we want. Now, this is the physical length. So, it was like this big before. 200 would be twice as big, right? So we could save this, run it, take a look and see what that looks like. And now suddenly the slider is twice as big. Now, that does not mean it goes from 0 to 200. This is just the physical length. It's just like 200. Think of it as pixels, 200 pixels, right? I mean, we could get crazy with this, and why not? Let's go 400. Oh yeah, that's right. So now we see it goes all the way the length of this thing almost. Very cool. So, all right, that's length, very useful. We can also set the orientation. So that's just orient. And by default, it is horizontal. That's, side to side. We can also change this to vertical. Go ahead and save this. This might even be too big for our app. Nope. And now it goes up and down and up, right? So, okay, that's cool. I'm going to go ahead and change this back because I find that annoying. So horizontal, so side to side. Now, if you wanted to go side to side, you don't have to put orient equals horizontal, obviously, because we did that earlier. It defaults to horizontal just by default. So, okay, now we could set the from and the to. So, what do we want it to start at? 0 maybe, or 10 or 50 or 100 or whatever you want it to start at. And we use the from underscore attribute. And it's from underscore because from is like a Python keyword, so we can't use from. So it's from underscore. And I'm going to set this to 0. And then we could set the 2 equal to whatever we want. So 100, 200, whatever. I'm going to put it at 100 for now. Now, we can't actually see this yet because we don't have anything to see what the scale is. So let's fix that real quick. Let's create a label. And I'm going to call this my underscore label. And it's going to be a tb.label. We just want to put this in root. We want the text to equal nothing to start out with. And let's my underscore label dot pack this guy, put him onto the screen. And now what we could do is give this scale a command, sort of like a button when you press it. So I'm going to call this command scalar. I don't know, whatever. So now we can create that function to do something every time we move the slider around. So let's define scalar. And now a normal function, you don't have to do anything, but with this, you have to pass in an event because every time you move the slider around, that will push an event into this function. And the event that it's pushing is the position. So whatever it happens to be, that's what it'll be. So what do we want to do? Well, let's change the my underscore label.config. Let's change the text on that to something else. Well, what do we want to change it to? Let's change it to my underscore scale dot get. And that will allow us to get the current position and then output it to the label. So let's go ahead and save this and run it. Now remember, we've set it from 0 to 100, so that's sort of interesting. If we run this guy and we grab this, you'll see, well, first that's very little, but it's 10.36294300518134134, right? That's a very long decimal number and we don't love that. So, but you will notice it goes from 0.0, all the way up to 100.0. So that looks good. So first, let's come down here to our label and let's give this a font of, say, Helvetica and like size 18, make it nice and bigger. Now also, let's take off this from and this to. So if we run this again, you're going to notice that we didn't set a from and to, so now it's just from 0 to 1. And it's all of these very, very long decimal numbers. So what can we do here? Well, first, let's give this back up from 0 to 1. But now we can come up here and wrap our myscale.get in the int function. This is just the Python integer function. This will convert anything into an integer. So if we do that and run it, that should get rid of all the decimal point numbers and just give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, up to 100. Very cool. So moving right along, let's change this to 500, right? Now, again, this won't change the physical length of the slider. This is the from to. So now it goes up to 500, right? So you might be thinking, well, okay, that's great to put these numbers on the screen, but what if we want to actually do something based on where the slider is? Well, of course, then you would just do it in this function, right? So instead of putting this label thing here, you might say, you know, if my underscore scale dot get is less than 50, you know, do something else, right? You would do logic in there. So that's how you would do that. So, okay, moving right along, we can change this. I'm going to put this back to 100 because scales should go from 0 to 100 in my mind, right? 0 to 100%. That sort of makes sense. And we could change this around if we wanted to get fancy, put a little percentage sign there. If we run this, I'm just messing around now for fun. It's outside of the quotation mark. Put it in the quotation mark. See, getting sloppy. All right, so save this and run it. Now it very fancily says 74%. Right? I don't know. Totally useless, but fun nonetheless. So what else can we do with this? Well, the only other really interesting thing, there are some other things you could do with this, but the only really interesting thing is you could set the state to disabled, right? So if we save this and run it, now it doesn't work at all. And if you wanted to enable this, you would create a button or something that when you clicked it, it would set this to normal, right? So normal or disabled, those are the two options there. And again, if we run this guy one more time, now it's enabled again, and we can play with our glorious slider once again. And that's all there is to it. So that's the slider, pretty easy. Scale, that's the scale, pretty easy. I don't know why they call it a scale. It's obviously a slider, but yeah, pretty fun. In this video, we're going to look at the scroll bar with TTK Bootstrap. And there's several different things we can do with this. We can make it sort of square. We can make it kind of rounded. We can change the color and do all the things. So that's what we're going to look at in this video. So I've got a file. I'm just calling it scroller.py. And it's our basic Tkinter starter code that we always have. We've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. I pip installed that many videos ago in the series. We're using the superhero theme, and that's pretty much it. So let's start out by creating a basic frame. So I'm going to call this my_frame, and this is going to be a tb.frame, though I suppose you could use a regular Tkinter frame because we're not actually going to look at this. We want to put it in root, and it's just going to be used as a container to hold the things to put a scroll bar in. So we're not really going to see it or anything. So it could be a TTK Bootstrap frame or a regular Tkinter frame, really doesn't matter. And so let's my_frame.pack this guy, and let's give it a pad Y of like 20, push it down screen a little bit. So, okay. Now let's create a scroll bar, and I'm going to call this my_scroll, and this is going to be a tb.scrollbar, and we want to put it in my_frame, right? So here we can give this an orient of, let's say vertical. We want it to go up and down, right? Otherwise it would be horizontal. And here's where we can do some different things. Let's give this a boot style of, and you can use all your regular boot styles with this: primary, secondary, light, dark, info, success, danger, whatever color you want, all the regular boot styles that we've looked at in all these other videos in this series. So, you know, whatever you like there. Let's go danger, make it red and annoying looking. I don't know. You could put it, I would probably use dark with this superhero theme, but I'll just do danger for now just to make it obnoxious and funny looking. Now, the only other option you have as far as boot styles is you can leave it like this and it'll just be a square scroll bar, like a normal default scroll bar. Or you could make it round and it'll be slightly rounded. So we'll do round for now. Maybe we'll play with this in a minute. So, okay, now we need to pack this, guys. So let's go my_scroll.pack. And we want to put this on the side of, let's say, the right side. And let's give it a fill of Y. So Y is up and down, vertical. Okay, so now let's just create a text widget. So we have something that we can, scroll, right? So let's go text widget. And I'm just going to call this my_text. And this is going to be a regular text widget because I'm not sure there is one with TTK Bootstrap, but it doesn't matter. We're just going to use a regular text widget. And we want to put this in my_frame. And let's give this a width of like, 30 and like a height of 25. And now here the important thing is, and let me put this on another line, we want a Y scroll command of my_scroll.set. And let's also give this a wrap of none. So there's no word wrapping inside the text box. And while we're at it, let's give it a font of Helvetica and like a size of 18 so the font's nice and big. So this Y scroll command will set our scroll bar, this guy right here, as the scroll bar for this widget, right? This is just basic Tkinter scroll bar stuff, has nothing to do with TTK Bootstrap. You would do this for any sort of scroll bar using regular Tkinter or TTK or this or anything else. So, all right, that looks good. So now let's my_text.pack this guy. And I don't think I want to give it any sort of padding because we don't want the frame to show here. We just want the text widget to show, so we won't give it any padding. Okay, so finally, we need to config the scroll bar. Once we've created it, we always need to then config it. So let's go my_scroll.config. And let's give this a command of my_text.yview. And that'll sort of associate our scroll bar with our text widget, right? So here we set it, and here we give it a command so that whenever we move it, it knows to move this guy right here. So, okay, let's go ahead and save this and run it. Head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python scroller.py. And when we do, we get this annoying red scroll bar. And if we type some stuff here, we can see the scroll bar moves, and we can scroll. You'll notice it has a slight roundedness to it, right? So that's cool. If we want to take that off, we could come up here to our boot style and our scroll, and we defined it and just take off that round. If we save this and run it, you see now we have just the regular sort of default square scroll bar. Whatever you like. That's pretty cool. So let's play around with this very quickly one more time. Instead of danger, let's change this to dark. And I want to bring that round back. And this is probably what I would do if I was actually making an app using this color scheme, because I don't know, I think that looks kind of modern and cool, having it dark like that. And there we go. So that's a scroll bar. Now, if you wanted to change this into, sort of down here, horizontal, you would just change your orient to vertical, and this, instead of Y, it would be X, and instead of this Y view, it would be X view, right? So Y is up and down, X is left and right. That's really all there is to it. Also, this, instead of Y scroll command, it would be obviously X scroll command, right? So basically just change all the Ys to X's, and you've got yourself a horizontal scroll bar instead of a vertical one. So those are scroll bars with TTK Bootstrap. Very easy, very cool, and pretty fun. In this video, we're going to look at the separator, this line thing here, and the size grip, this little dotted thing in the corner here that allows us to do this. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So I've got a file, I'm just calling it sep.py, short for separator.py, I guess. And we're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB. I pip installed that long ago in this series. We're using the superhero theme, and that's pretty much it. So let's come down here and let's create a label real quick. I'm just going to call it label 1. And this is going to be a tb.label. And it's TB because we imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. And we just want to put this in root. Now let's just have the text say label 1, no big deal. Let's give this a boot style of, I don't know, let's say light. And let's label 1.pack this guy. Give it a pad Y of like 40, really push it down the screen. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to copy and make another one. And we'll call this one label 2. And this will just say label 2. So in between these, we want a separator. So separator. So I'm going to call this my_sep. And this is going to be a tb.separator. And we want to put it in root. And here, the main thing that you can do with this is give it a boot style. And this allows you to change the color of the separator, that line, right? And that's really all a separator is. It's just a line. And so you can use all your regular boot styles, dark, light, primary, secondary, info, success, danger, any other ones I forgot. So I'm just going to make this danger so it's red and nice and easy to see. Let's go my_sep.pack. And we're going to play around with this a little bit more because there's a couple of things you can do with this. But for now, let's just save this and run it, make sure this looks okay. Let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory. And let's run python sep.py. And when we do, we get label 1, label 2, and this tiny little separator. Now, you'll notice it's very small by default. And it's actually a little hard to change the size of this. I'll show you how to do it, but it's not as easy as you might think or hope or expect it to be. So let's first, before we do that, there is one main thing we can change about this. We can change the orient. So by default, it is horizontal, right? And you don't have to do orient equals horizontal. Obviously, we just saw that. By default, it's already horizontal. But if you want it to go up and down, you just change it to vertical. So if we save this and run it, now we have it going up and down, right? So, okay, that's cool. I'm going to go ahead and change this back to horizontal. Now, the question becomes, how do we change the size of this thing? And when you're using pack, we can change it to fill equals X. And X is left to right. If you were doing this vertical, up and down, you would change this to Y, right? But we're doing it horizontal. We'll put fill equals X. Now, if you do this, you'll notice we run this, it stretches the entire size of the app, which may be what you want, maybe not. So how do we change the size from not very little or very big, but some other measure? How do we do that? Now, normally with Kinter, you would use a width attribute. So you would come up here and you would just say, width equals 200 or something, and that'd be good to go. Not so with the separator. With that, we need to use pad X. So pad X gives padding on either side on the X axis, right? So if we gave it a pad X of, let's say 10, that would take just a little bit off of each side, right? So if we run this, you can see just a little bit off the edge. It doesn't go all the way to the end, right? So we would have to play around with this based on whatever you want. So if you gave it, say, 100, and think of these as pixels, 100 pixels. See, now it's, got 100 on each side. So just play around with that and, get it to the size you want. It's not a great method, but it's sort of what we have, right? So that's the separator, very simple. The only other option is just to change the boot style, right? And so instead of danger, maybe we would say info, right? So if we save this and run it, now it's sort of light blue, right? So, okay, that's the separator. Now let's look at the size grip. And I don't find this to be all that popular. but you may find some use for it. So we'll look at it real quick. Let's create this guy. I'm going to call this my underscore size grip. Very original. And this is just going to be a TB dot size grip. We want to put it in root. And same thing, you can give this a boot style of whatever you want. So I'm just going to stick with the same color scheme here. So info, we'll make it info colored, that light blue. And that's pretty much it. So now if we my underscore size grip dot pack this guy and just put it on the screen, we can see if this worked. And we see it's right here in the middle of our app because that's where we packed it, right? But if you grab this and sort of hold your mouse button down, you can resize it from there. Now, of course, you could also do it from the corner. But back in the day, apps used to have these little grippy things on the corner. And so if you're old enough, you remember that. Maybe you put the size grip thing in the corner, or if for some weird reason you need to resize your app from inside of the app like this, and you just want to put your size grip right in the middle of the screen, that's how you do that. But how can we put this in the corner? Well, we're packing this guy, so we would have to use anchor in the pack statement here. So I would put this in the southeast corner, SE. So south is all the way down, east is all the way over, right? And then that will sort of get us there. If we save this and run it, it won't quite work. You'll see it puts it over here, but that's not, exactly what we want. We want it down in this corner. So what we could do is give this a fill equals both, and then make sure it's expanded. So we could go expand equals true. So that should jam it down in the bottom right corner. If we run this, sure enough, there it is. Now we can do that, and it looks like it should, and we're good to go. So I put 2 widgets in this video. We usually just do 1 widget per video, but these are kind of lame widgets. The size grip, you're never going to use that. You might, but I've never used it. I've been using Kinter for years and years and years. I've never actually used a size grip. Same thing with a separator. You might use a separator. There might be some visual reason for you to put a line in your app. Very easy to use though, and that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to look at spin boxes, and this is a spin box. You can see you can just click it and sort of spin through each one. We can have it where when we click the button, this label changes, or we can have it whenever we just spin it, the label changes as well. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So I've got a file here. I'm just calling it spinner.py. It's our basic Kinter starter code. And I've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. I pip installed that many videos ago. We're using the superhero theme, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So let's start out by creating a spin box. So I'm going to go spin box. Woohoo! And I'm going to call this my underscore spin. And this is going to be a tb.spinbox. And it's tb dot because we imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. And we want to put this in root, and we want to give this a boot style. And here you can use all the different boot style colors that we've looked at in all the other videos in this series. So primary, secondary, info, success, danger, warning, light, dark, all of those things. Let's just go success here, make it nice and green and weird. And then let's my underscore spin dot pack this guy and give it a pad Y of like 20. Now, there's several different things you can do with this. First, let's make this a little bit bigger. Let's give this a font of Helvetica and a size of 18, so it's nice and big and we can see this. Now, also, I'm going to put this on a separate line so it's easier to read. You can do spin boxes a couple of different ways. You can have words and other things in there, or you can have numbers. So we'll start out just with numbers. So if you want to designate a range, you can just go from underscore equals, and let's start at 0, and let's go to, let's say 10, right? So that's really all we have to do. Let's go ahead and save this and run it. Head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's go python spinner.py. And when we do, we see right away, we get this sort of empty looking spin box. It's not empty. If we actually click it, it starts at 0, and then it goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, right? So we can go back down again and back up again. So that's to and from. And now you'll notice when we started this, there was nothing listed here. I'll talk about that in just a minute too. But before we do that, let's look at the other way to do this using words. So here, let's go spinbox list. And here we can just create a Python list. I'm just going to call it stuff because, I have no imagination. And let's go John and April and Bob and Mary. So in order to use these, we just use a values tag and set that equal to our stuff. Right. One thing to note, when you add a value, it will override your from and to. So we can leave that on there. It'll just override it. So here, let's go ahead and save this and run it. And when we do, we click this. Now it says John, April, Bob, and Mary. So one thing you'll notice, like I said, it's blank when it starts, and also the text seems to be highlighted. What's up with that? Well, with spin boxes, you can delete the thing that's in there and add your own thing, right? You just type it in. So now it's John, April, Bob, Mary, and Tim, right? So that's one sort of weird thing about spin boxes. Personally, I've never found a use for that, but I don't know, maybe you would find some sort of use for that. But we can disable that if we want by setting the state of the spin box. So let's come down here and set a state of, and let's set this to read only. So now when we run this, we won't be able to change it anymore by typing, but also you'll notice it's not highlighted, right? So if I click on this and hit delete and try to type something in, nothing happens, right? So that may be what you want as a default sort of thing. I usually would use that for my spin boxes because I don't want people changing them at runtime. So that's kind of interesting. Now, what about this thing where when we run this, it starts off being blank? Well, maybe that's what you want, maybe not. You can set the value of this if you want. Head back over to our code and let's set the value. Let's say set spin box default. And we're actually going to need to do this underneath the spin box because we can't set a default before we've created a spin box. So here we just call my_spin and we can dot set this guy. And you can set this to anything you want. So I'm going to set this to John by default. So that's the first item in our list. So that's what I want to set it as by default. So now when we come back over here and run this guy, boom, right off the bat, John is listed. And we can cycle back up all the way through it, spin up, spin down, all the good things. Very cool. So, okay, that's cool. But how do we decide if something has been selected? And by selected, I mean it's the thing showing in the spin box right now. So for instance, April. How do we get April out of here if somebody has spun up to April? Well, we can .get our thing. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. Let's create a button, and it's just going to be my_button, and it's going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in root. We want the text to equal click me, and we want the boot style to be that same success green. And then let's my_button dot pack this guy. Give it a pad Y20, push down the screen a little bit. Now here, we want to give this also a command. And I'm going to call this spinny, right? And so now we can come up here to the top and create this function. So let's define spinny. And here we can do something. But first, let's come down here and let's create a label. So this is going to be my_label. And it's going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in root. We want the text to equal nothing right off the bat. And let's give this a font of Helvetica and like a size 18 so it's bigger so that we can read it. And then let's my_label.pack this guy. Give him a pad Y20, push down the screen. So now what we want to happen is when we click this button, we want to change the text of this label to whatever's in the spin box. Well, to do that, we just come up here to our function and we my_label.config this guy. And we can set the text equal to my_spin.get. And many things in Tkinter, you can .get them, and same thing with Spinbox. So that's cool. You can also set a string var to your Spinbox and get that, but I find that sort of useless. It's just an extra step. So what I'll do is I'll just myspin.get whatever the Spinbox is. So let's come back here, run this guy one more time. And here, if we click me for John, boom, it says John there. If we spin it up to Bob and click it, boom, it says Bob. If we hit Mary, boom, Mary. And not to leave out April, boom, April. So that's how you can use a button. And our button is blue. That's interesting. I thought we put that as success. Oh, I misspelled success. Boom, there we go. So that works for the button, but what if you don't want to use a button? What if you just want to use the spin box itself? Well, you can give your spin box a command. So let's put this on another line and we can just call our spinny function. Same exact function, or you can use a different function, really doesn't matter. So now when we run this guy, hopefully our button is green. Yes, it is. Instead of clicking the button, if I just spin this up to April, boom, it says April. When I click this thing again, boom, Bob. So it's the actual little spin box toggle things that determine when the function gets called, when that command runs, right? And there we go. So that's Spinbox, pretty easy, pretty straightforward, not a whole lot of bells and whistles here. Personally, I don't really use the Spinbox all that much, but it certainly has a place in some apps, and if you need it, that's how you use it. Piece of cake. Okay, in this video, like I said, we're gonna look at the tree view for TTK Bootstrap. And I'm not gonna get into the tree view in great detail. I've got other videos on that. I'm gonna take some of my older videos that I did on the tree view and put them into one big video, and I'll post that in a few days. So if you wanna get into a deep dive on the tree view, you can look at that. But for now, I'm just gonna show you how to make a basic tree view, how to do the TTK Bootstrap styling and stuff that you would expect for this thing. And that's what we're gonna look at in this video. So here we've got a tree view, and you can see it's just this box thing with rows and columns. And we got first name, last name, email address. I just kept it very simple. We got some dummy data, first name 1, last name 1, email 1, etc. So that's what we're gonna look at in this video. So we've got a file, I'm calling it tree_view.py. It's our basic Kinter starter code. We've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB, as always. We pip installed that long ago. We're using the superhero theme, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So let's go ahead and just define the columns that we want in our tree view. And I'm just gonna call this columns. And this is just gonna be a little tuple here. And we want first underscore name. Then we want last underscore name. And then let's just go email. So very simple, all there is to it. So now let's create a simple tree view. So I'm gonna call this my underscore tree. And it's gonna be a tb.treeview. And it's tb dot because up here we imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. And here we just want to put this in a root, and we want to select a boot style. And these are the same boot style colors that we've used for all the TTK Bootstrap widgets, right? So you have primary, secondary, success, info, warning, danger, light, dark, all the things. So I'm just going to go success. So that's that green color. And then we want to set the columns to whatever our columns are going to be. Well, right here, we defined our columns as columns. So we're going to set columns equal to columns. And here, let me put this on another line. We want to show, and we want to show the headings. Now this will show, the headings at the top of each column, which we haven't actually defined yet, but that'll do that. So, all right, that looks good. So now we want to show these headings. We have to define the headings, right? So let's go my underscore tree dot heading. And then here we just designate each column. So the first one is first underscore name. That's this thing right here. But then we put a comma, and then the text for that heading is going to be what? Let's just go first name. So you notice this is more like a variable name, and this is more like the text that's going to show on the tree view. So, it's capitalized, it's got a space in there, it looks nicer, right? So let me just copy this, and we'll do this a couple more times. So we have first name, we also have last name. And here I'll change this to last name. And then this one will be email. And I'll switch the text for this to email address. Make it look nice and pretty. Okay, so that looks good. So now let's create some sample data, right? Now normally you would have real data, but we don't have any real data. This is just a tutorial. So I'm gonna go ahead and create some. So let's create a Python list that's empty. And now let's fill it with some fake data. So let's go for in range of 1 through 20. So we're gonna have 20 rows, right? And then for each row, we want contacts.append, and it's contacts.append because, well, let's change this to contacts. All right, so we're going to append into this empty Python list. What do we want to append? Well, let's create a list here. So let's choose F strings. And for each one, I'm going to say the first name and then just pass in a number. So that'll be n. That's this guy right here. So for each one of these, so the first time we loop through this, the n will be 1. The second time we loop through this, the n will be 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time we loop through here, this n will change. So this will allow the data that shows up on the tree view to be first 1, first 2, first 3 for each row, right? So, all right, that looks good for that. Now we also need to do the same thing for last. So let's go last in, and we also need to do the same thing for email. So let's go email in at address.com, right? All right, so just some basic dummy data. We'll cycle through and do 20 rows of that. So now all of this fake data has been appended to this Python list. Now we just need to put that list on our tree view, right? So we can do that right here. And let's do another loop. Let's go for contact in contacts. Right? And it's contacts because that's the name of our list here. Contact singular because we just make that one up. That's how loops work. And then let's go my underscore tree dot insert. And we want to put this at the 0th spot. So from 0 to end. And then what value do we want? Well, whatever that contact is. Okay. So, all right, that's really kind of all there is to it. Let's go ahead and save this and run it. Let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python tree_view.py. And you know what? We forgot to pack our tree view onto the screen. Why didn't you remind me? So let's see where we created our tree view right here. We obviously need to my_tree.pack this guy. Let's give this a pad Y of 20, push it down the screen a little bit. So, all right, that should work now. Head back over to our terminal, run this guy again, and there we go. And that's all there is to it, right? So we've got first one, first two, first three. We can use our mouse little scroll button to scroll down this guy. And there we go. So here we have our columns, first name, last name, email, and everything looks great. Now this whole thing is green because that's the boot style we selected, right? So we can go danger, right? Save this, run it. And now we've got the nice red, horribly ugly, right, tree view. So that's really all there is to it. Now, like I said, we're not going to dive deep into how to use tree views because with TTK Bootstrap, you just use your tree view like you would in a regular Tkinter widget, right? Just use all the same attributes that the regular Tkinter widget tree view has, and you're good to go. So there's nothing specific to TTK Bootstrap that you need to change except adding a boot style to change the color, basically, right? And like I said, I'll try and put together a deep dive of the tree view because it's really interesting. I could do 40 or 50 videos on it alone. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with it. And in fact, I have in past videos on my other Codemy.com channel. So I'll put together a bunch of those videos into one big video, upload it to this channel sometime in the next few days or so if you're interested in doing a deep dive on the tree view. And then, of course, if you wanted to make it into a TTK Bootstrap tree view, you just do what we did in this video to use a TTK Bootstrap tree view. In this video, we're going to look at message boxes for TTK Bootstrap. So we click this button, boom, a little box pops up. It's got a little message, a little title, a little icon. We can click yes or no. If we click no, hey, you click no. If we try it again and click yes, hey, you click yes. Now there are a bunch of these different dialog boxes that you can use. You can ask questions, you can show warnings, you can give info, all that stuff. We're going to look at all of that in this video. So I've got our basic starter code that we've always got. We're using the superhero theme. We've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. We pip installed that many videos ago. And the first thing we need to do here is import something. So let's go from TTK Bootstrap.dialogs. So this is basically a dialog box, right? So we want to import message box. Now there are other things you can import like message dialog. We don't need that for this video, but it's a similar sort of pop-up box, and maybe we'll talk about that in another video. So, okay, now the next thing you're going to notice is this root icon bitmap. Now this is the little icon that shows up when we run this file. So if we save this, I'm calling this mbox.py, head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python mbox.py. That icon is this little icon right up here we've designated. That's the icon, right? So when we have a message box pop up, it will have its own icon, but it'll just show the default TTK Bootstrap icon unless you make a little bit of a change right here. So we need to copy this line and let me say message box icon here. And it's the same exact code. We just set a default equal to this, right? Now you might think, hey, do we need this line anymore? Yeah, we do. We can comment this out. And if we run this again, we're going to get no icon basically here, just the default thing, right? So we have to keep both of these lines. It's really kind of weird. I have no idea why that's the case. But let's say right here, main app icon. And then here we've got the message box icon. So, okay, that's good. So now let's build out this app. So let's create a button. I'm just going to call it my button. It's going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in root. We want the text to say, click me. Woohoo. And let's give this a boot style of, I don't know, danger to make it red, and a command of, I don't know, clicker, right? So every time this button gets pressed, we want to run the function clicker. So we don't have that yet. We'll create that in just a second. But for now, let's my_button.pack, put this guy on the screen. Let's give this a pad Y of 40 to really push it down the screen. So there's our button. And here we need to define our clicker function here. And we'll do that in just a second. Now, I also want to create a quick little label. So I'm going to call this my_label. This is going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in root. We want the text to equal nothing for now. And let's give this a font of, I don't know, like Helvetica size 18, just to make it bigger so that we can read it easier. And then let's my_label.pack. And I don't know, give this a pad Y of 20, push it down the screen a little bit. Probably don't need to do that, but okay. So now we've got this function called clicker. And every time you press this button, we call this function. So what do we want to do? Well, let's create a dialog. So I'm going to call this MD, short for message dialog, or MB, short for message box, whatever. It doesn't really matter at all. And this is going to be a message box. Now here we have to designate what type of message box we want. So let's go yes, no. There's like, I don't know, 8 or 9 of these. We'll go over all of them in a second. But for now, we'll just do yes, no. And let's create a list of these. So let's go yes, no. And I'll add these as we go through them all. So here we could say display some message here. This is going to be the message that pops up in the middle of the box. So whatever you want to display in your message box, type it in there. And then here is the title. So this will go on the title bar up at the top, right? So, okay, that looks good. Now, for now, let's just run this and see what we have. So let's save this, head back over to our code, run this guy again. So here we've got this thing, we click it, boom. It says display some message here. Here's the title. You'll notice there's our little icon up there, and we have a yes or a no. Well, if we click no, what happens? Well, we don't know yet. So what does happen? Well, let's come down here and display button click, right? So let's go my_label.config, and we want to set the text equal to, and I'm just going to create an F string, and then I'm going to say you clicked. And then inside of here, we're just going to go MB. So whatever you clicked here will get assigned to this variable, and it will output right there. So let's go ahead and save this, head back over here, run this guy again. So we click me. So now when we click yes, it says you clicked yes. When you click no, it says you click no, right? So basically, if you click no, it's returning the word NO, capital NO. Now this is just a string. Now you can do stuff based on that, right? So you could do an if statement. Right, so let's go if MB equals no, then, we could print no, or whatever you wanted to do. Else, you would, print yes. Like whatever you wanted to do, you could do right there, right? So let me just comment all this out because this is kind of silly, but this is just an example of how you can do stuff logically based on what the person selects, right? Now, each of these things we're going to talk about, yes, no is the first one. There's lots of different message boxes. Each one returns a different thing. So you have to know what it returns in order to do your if-else logic correctly. And we'll see that in just a second. So, all right, but for now, I'm just going to, let's copy this and we'll just print out you clicked whatever just to see what each of these things do. So, okay, the first one was yes, no. We looked at that one. The next one is okay, right? So we'll just type in messagebox.okay. If we save this guy and run it and click here, now it says the button is just okay. And if we click this, it says you clicked none. Now this actually returns the word none, right? So it's a string, it's just none. You would do your logic if, MB equals none, do this, else do something else, right? So, okay, that's kind of interesting, I guess. The next one is okay cancel. So let's come down here and okay cancel. You'll never guess what this one does, right? Maybe you will guess. It does okay or cancel, right? So if you click okay, it says you clicked okay. If you click cancel, it says you clicked cancel, right? So it's returning okay or cancel. All right, so that's okay cancel. Now, obviously, whatever you want to do in your app, that's going to determine which of these you use, right? If you want to give the user the ability to cancel or click OK, you would use OK cancel. If you want them to answer a question, yes or no, you would use yes or no, right? If you just want to give them a message and have them close it, you might just use OK, right? It just depends on what you're trying to do in your app, right? So, okay, the next one is show info. So actually, this is show underscore info. In regular Tkinter, it's show info without an underscore. And in TTK Bootstrap, for some reason, it's show underscore info. I'm not sure what's going on there, but that's what it is. So again, we can come up here. And here it says display some message here, but it has this little icon, this little info, right? You're showing info. This is the little info icon, right? And if you click OK, it returns none. So, okay, maybe you want the little info icon to pop up. If so, you would use show info, right? We also have show error, right? So this one's actually kind of interesting, right? Because if you're doing error handling in your app and you want to show an error that's popped up, you would probably want to use this. And this is nice because I don't know if you could hear that or not. It made a little ding. It went ding, a little warning ding. And it also has this big red X, like warning, right? So that's interesting. If we click OK, it returns again, none. So, all right, that's cool. So, okay, that's cool. Let's show error. And we also have show underscore question. So we can change this one to show underscore question. Save this guy, clear this screen. It's getting unruly. Run this guy again. And here we get this little question mark. And we get yes or no. Now, if we click yes here, it says yes. If we click no, it says no. Again, you'll hear maybe it'll pick it up on the microphone. A little ding and ding, right? So that's what that does. So, all right, that's cool. Oh, that was interesting. Let's run that again. I probably should have mentioned that. If you click yes, it returns yes. If you click no, it returns no. If you come up here and click the little X, it does none. So keep that in mind. That's the case for all of them as well. So, okay, that's cool. Let's start another line here. And the next one is show underscore warning. Show underscore warning is very similar to show underscore error. So let's run show underscore warning. Save this guy. Run him again. But instead of a big red X, you get this sort of warning, like, almost like a traffic sign, but with an exclamation mark. And when we click OK, it's none. When we click the X here, it also returns none. So, all right. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I feel like there's one or two more. So what else do we have? So we did yes, no. We also have yes, no, cancel. So this is very much like yes, no, cancel. But instead of 2 buttons, you have 3 buttons, which is kind of interesting. So if we run this guy, we get yes, no, and cancel. If we click yes, you clicked yes. If we click no, you click no. If we click cancel, we get cancel. And again, if we click the X, we get none. So, all right, that's interesting. Finally, one more, we have retry and cancel. All right, so this is kind of interesting. We have retry, cancel. And I'm guessing you could probably guess what this one's going to do. Right? It's not rocket science here. We have retry and cancel. And if we click retry, it returns the word retry. And if we click cancel, it returns the word cancel. So that's pretty much it. And none if you click the little X in the top. So those are message boxes. Very, very useful, very cool, very easy to do. And that's kind of all there is to it. If you want to learn more about these, you can go to, ttkbootstrap.readthedocs.io and click on API and then come down here to message box. And it has each of them listed here. So here's the OK one, here's the OK cancel one, and it has all the different little attributes you can play around with, right? Whether to ring the bell or not, the title, the message, we've already did those two. So you can come through here and read all these if you're interested, but we pretty much hit the main points and that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to look at the color chooser for TTK Bootstrap, and that's this guy right here. You can see, ooh, it's very neat looking. And if you can click on this, boom, it'll pick a color, give you all the data. We can click OK, and now we're going to change our color to that color. Let's change it to blue, whatever. It doesn't matter what you do with the color that you choose. That's kind of irrelevant, but I'll show you how to get the actual information. You can see the RGB value and the hex code and all that good stuff. So that's what we're going to look at in this video. So I've got a file, I'm just calling it cc.py, short for color chooser, I guess, .py. And it's our basic Kinter starter code that we've been using. We've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. We pip installed that many videos ago, and we're using the superhero theme. So let's come down here, and I'm just going to create a quick button real quick. I'm going to call it my_button, and it's going to be a TB.button. We want to put it in root. We want the text to say, click me, right? Let's give it a boot style of danger to make it red just for fun. And let's give it a command of CC, short for color chooser, I guess, right? And we don't have this function yet. We'll create it in just a second. So let's my_button, .pack this guy, put it on the screen, and let's give this a pad Y of like 40 to really push it down the screen. Now underneath this, I want a label. So I'm going to call this my_label just so that I can show you the output of the color chooser, what it returns. So for now, let's just create this as a tb.label, put it in root, and give it a text of nothing for now. And actually, let's make this font bigger so it's easier to read. So I'm going to make this Helvetica and like a size 18. So, okay, let's go my_label. Pack this guy and give it a pad Y like 10, push it down screen a little bit. So, okay, now we've got all this set up. Let's define our CC function, color chooser, and call it anything you want. I'm just calling it CC. So in order to use the color chooser, first we have to actually import it up here at the top of the screen. So let's go from TTK Bootstrap .dialogues, because technically this is a dialog box. It's a little box that pops up, right? And then .color chooser. We want to import color chooser dialog. And you'll notice the capitalization, the C is capitalized, this C is capitalized, and this D is capitalized. So color chooser dialog. And now that will allow us to use it. Now it's kind of weird since we're kind of importing everything from TTK Bootstrap. Why do we have to import these dialogues separately? I don't know, you just have to, right? That's how that works. And so let's create a color chooser. So I'm gonna call it my_color, call it anything you want. And this is gonna be a color chooser dialog, right? Now, in order to show this onto the screen, have it pop up, we call my_color.show, right? And that will show it. So strictly speaking, this will work, but it won't really do anything after, we run it. So let's save it and run it just to make sure this is working. Head back over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory, and let's run python cc.py. When we do, we get this thing. Oh, it says message box. We're gonna have to change the title. We could click this. Hey, it pops up. That's great. But if we click on one of these colors and click OK, nothing happens. It's not actually returning anything. So how do we get it to actually return something? Well, first, let's come up here and change this to color chooser for the title, right? And let's come down here. And to capture what it returns, we can create a variable or we could just call a function. So let me comment this, create color chooser, and then show color chooser. And then here, let's say return color chooser info. All right, so how do we do that? Well, let's just create a variable, call it colors, and we're gonna set this equal to my_color, which is our color chooser, what we defined right here, and then .result. Now, this will return 3 things, and I'll show you what those 3 things are in just a second. But for now, let's output to the label. So remember, we have this label called my_label. So let's .config this guy and set the text equal to colors, whatever is returned here, right? So, all right, let's go ahead and save this and run it, see what we got here. So we click this and let's pick a nice screen. Now you'll notice it returns hue, saturation, and luminosity, HSL. It also returns red, green, blue, RGB, right? You've probably heard of RGB in color things in the past. That stands for red, green, blue. It also returns the hex code. Now this hex code is useful. This is really what you want, the hex code. Because anytime you're using colors, you want the hex code, right? If you want to change a color, use the hex code. I mean, you could use these things too, but they're not commonly used for that. But just for now, let's just click OK and see what it returns. And you'll notice it returns a string of numbers. Now, that's not that useful. Let's come up here and pick the most top rightest color. And that's hue of 0, 150, red of 255, green of 0, 0, and this hex color code. So now when we click this, you can see it returns these 3 things. And if we run this again and click on this again, and you can see the RGB is the first one. So 255, 0, and 0. That's this column right here, 255, 0, and 0. Then we have HSL, 0, 150, 0, 150. And finally, we have the hex color code, FF000, FF000. So that's cool, but how do we get each of these individual things? It's returning 3 of them. How do we get each individual one? Well, super easy. There's a little function you can call, but instead of calling colors, you can call the thing you want. So say, for instance, .hex. So here, let's go .hex, .hsl, and .rgb. So here, if we just want the .hex, we can do that, save this, run it. Here, let's pick the red again. And boom, it's just returning that hex, right? So if we wanted the RGB, instead of .hex, we would call .rgb, right? So if we save this and run it, I know, very exciting. If we click this, pick this color again, it's just returning to 255, 0, and 0. Same for HSL. We could just go, HSL, and that will return the HSL. So I like the hex. You're almost always going to use the hex. So that's what we want to return. Now, let's change the background color of our app to chosen color, right? So let's just be goofy and play around with this. We could just root.configure and set the background to, whatever we want. So colors.hex, whatever we're returning here. So let's go ahead and save this and run it. This is kind of a goofy example of why you might want to use this, but I don't know, you could do it like this. And let's change this to this pink. Whoa, there we go. Our background is now pink. We could do orange. Now it's orange. We could do blue. And you could do this for anything, right? Any widget, you could change the color. So if you wanted to change the color of your button, you'd do the same thing, right? Just configure your button, set the background color to, that hex color code right there. And that's all there is to it. So kind of a goofy example, but, I don't know. There's lots of different things you would use this for. And I can't go over all of those examples. There's thousands of them. So there's just one little simple example on how to use it. The main thing you really want is just to understand, to get the color code out of here, you're going to call your colors.hex. Now we went colors.hex. You could just as easily, instead of creating this variable right here, you could just go, let's see, let's come in here and go mycolors.result.hex. Right? If you wanted to just string along an object-oriented sort of thing with this, which is our color chooser, right? We called it my color, and it returns a result, and that result can be a hex or an HSL or an RGB, right? So really, either way that works, but I find it cleaner and easier just to create a variable right here, add this in here, and then just call colors.hex to get the hex code. All right, this is gonna be a very short video, but a very cool video. And that's because we're gonna look at the scrolled text widget. And that is just what it sounds like, a text widget that is built in with a scroll bar. Look at that, woohoo, right? So in the past, we had to create an actual scroll bar widget and add it to a text box or add it to a frame or add it to whatever. In TTK Bootstrap, there's actually a widget built into it that has a scroll bar right there. And you could do a couple cool things with it. You could hide it, you could show it, you could have it, when you hover your mouse over, it appears or doesn't appear. Very cool and very easy to use. And that's what we're gonna look at in this video. Now, I don't know, 10 videos ago or so, I did a video on scroll bars with TTK Bootstrap. And you could use scroll bars in the normal way that you would with Tkinter. Or you can, if you're using a text widget, you can just use this little trick I'm about to show you right now. So I've got a file, I'm calling it scroll_text.py, and we've got our basic TTK Bootstrap starter code that we always have. I've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. We're using the superhero theme, and everything else is pretty much rudimentary. So to use this, we actually have to import it first. So let's go from TTK Bootstrap dot scrolled. We want to import scrolled text. Now you'll notice the S and the T and scrolled text are both capitalized. Everything here is lowercase. So that's all we have to do. We just have to import it. Now I know we imported pretty much everything here in TTK Bootstrap as TB, but we still have to, for some reason, import this guy as well. So let's come down here and let's create a text box. So text widget. And I'm going to call this my_text. And now normally this would be a TB dot, text widget. But not this time. This time we're calling just straight up scrolled text. And that's because we imported that right there, right? So we want to put this in root. And now we can give this a height of, let's say 20 and a width of 110. And let's also give this a wrap of word. This is basic text widget stuff. We want our words to wrap completely. We don't want to get to the end of the line in the text box and have a word get cut off mid-word and have half the word on one line and the other half of the word on the other line below it. We want to wrap the entire word down to the line below. So there we go. So really that's all we need. So let's go my_text.pack. And let's give this a pad Y 15 or so, push down the screen a little bit. So let's head back over to our terminal and run this guy. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory and let's run Python scroll_text.py. And we have a typo because we, of course, need an equal to sign there. Okay, so put an equal to sign, come back, clear the screen, run this guy again. All right. And there we go, boom. You'll notice it doesn't appear now, but if we start to type and, we gotta get to the end and keep going, you can see over there on the right, it's adding the little scroll bar thing. and we can scroll up and down, and it is fantastic. And that's all there is to it. So there's one thing I want to show you about this. In addition, we can also give this an auto hide of true. Now, by default, auto hide is set to false. As we just saw when we ran it, the scroll bar was there even though we didn't even need it until we started typing text, and then it kind of, popped up or whatever. If we set auto hide to true, head back over here, run this guy, you'll notice there is no scroll bar at all until I hover over, and then it kind of appears. Same deal if we start to type a bunch of stuff. You'll notice the scroll bar isn't automatically showing up. It's been hidden. It's auto hide. Auto hided. It's auto hided. But if we move our mouse over, boom, then it pops up and we can use it. Now, some people might like that. Some people might not. Personally, I don't know. I don't really care for that. It seems a little confusing. I want the scroll bar to just always be there. So what I would do is leave that off, or you could set this to auto hide equals false. Save this, head back over here, run this guy again, and we're going to get just the default thing where the scroll bar is just already there always. And as you kind of move down, the little scrolly thing appears. And very cool. So what else can we do to this? Well, we can use all of our boot styles if we want. Boot style. And you've got all of the boot styles that we've been talking about throughout this series: primary, secondary, info, success, danger, light, dark, any other ones that I might have missed. And you probably want to spell boot style right. And this won't change the text box itself, but it will change the scroll bar color. So if we head back over here and run this guy again, now our scroll bar is red because that's the danger color, right? Very cool. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And very neat. Now, if we head over to the TTK Bootstrap documentation at ttkbootstrap.readthedocs.io and then click on API, and let's see here. If we scroll down here, you can see there's a scrolled frame and a scrolled text. If you click on scrolled text, you can see some code and some things here. If you want to read more about this, you can see you can add boot style. You can also add padding. You'll notice you can designate vertical or horizontal bars. So you can have a V bar or an H bar. The V bar is default. We've just been looking at that. But if you wanted to add an H bar for a horizontal one, you could do that. Let's head back over here and let's go H bar equals true. And this just takes true or false. It's a Boolean. So if we come back over here, run this guy again, see now we've got horizontal and vertical. And if we scroll all the way over, you'll see now this one sort of appears and works, and very cool. So that's the scrolled text widget. So much easier than creating a scroll bar and physically adding it to your text widget or to a frame or whatever. Very awesome, very easy to use, and that's all there is to it. In this video, we want to look at scrolled frames for TTK Bootstrap. And it's very similar to scrolled text boxes. If you saw that video, you're probably good to go on this. You're going to pick this up almost immediately. If not, it's going to take like 30 seconds to explain this. Should be pretty easy. So this is what we're going to build, just a very simple app with a frame on it that has a scroll bar. And I just threw some buttons in here just to have something inside of it. And you can see it scrolls, right? So TTK Bootstrap makes this incredibly easy. In the past with regular Tkinter, you had to create an actual scroll bar and kind of add it to a frame. It was very sloppy, very kind of hard to do. With TTK Bootstrap, there's a widget that just comes with it and we could just use it and it's really easy. So that's what we're gonna look at in this video. So I've got a file here, I'm calling it scrolled_frame.py, and it's our basic TTK Bootstrap starter code that we always have. I've imported TTK Bootstrap as TB. We're using the superhero theme and everything else is pretty much normal as usual. So really the only kind of weird thing is we have to import this scrolled frame in order to use it. So let's go from TTK Bootstrap.scrolled. We want to import scrolled frame. And you'll notice the S and the F in frame are both capitalized, but the scrolled in this is lowercase. So that's really all we have to do. So let's create a scrolled frame. And I'm just going to call this my_frame. And this is going to be a scrolled frame. Now, normally we would go like tb.scrolledFrame, something like that, right? With regular TTK Bootstrap. But since we're importing this as scrolled frame, we just use scrolled frame right there. So we want to put this in our root. And just like the scrolled text box, you can set the auto hide. So I'm just going to put this to false. It's false by default. If you want to actually hide the little scroll bar until you hover over it, and we'll look at that in a minute, you would put true there, but otherwise we're good to go. So you could also put a boot style, but I'm just going to leave it as the default for now. We'll play with that in just a minute. So let's go my_frame.pack, and let's give this a pad Y of 15. And let's also give this a pad X of 15. And just for fun, I want to expand this to basically the whole size of our app. So let's just go fill equals both and expand equals yes. So that will pretty much blow it up to the entire size of our app. So in order to see this in action, we need to put something in it. So I'm going to create some buttons. Let's create some buttons. And I'm just going to do a quick for loop here. So let's go for X in range. And I'm going to put 20 of these buttons. So we'll put 21 here. And this is just going to be a TV.button. We want to put it in my_frame. And let's give this a boot style of what? Info, something like that. Change the color to light blue for the buttons. And let's have the text say, and let's make this into an F string. And let's just say, I don't know, click me, something like that. And let's just also put the count. So we'll put an X in there. And then let's just pack this guy, give it a pad Y of like 10 to space these out a little bit. So, okay. Now, normally I would never, ever, ever pack on the same line that we're creating the button. But in this case, since we're doing a for loop, it just sort of makes sense. So let's go ahead and save this and run it, see how this looks. So let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory. And let's run Python scrolled_frame.py. And when we do, we see we got a bunch of buttons from 0 to 20. And we've got this frame, and that looks good. Now, this is sort of transparent. It doesn't seem like there's anything there. That's because we use the default boot style. All right, so we could change the color of that if you want. So let's do that real quick. Up here in our frame, let's just give this a boot style of, I don't know, let's go dark. So if we save this, head back over here, run it again. Now we get a slightly different colored frame. And that's all there is to it. So you'll notice the scroll bar right here that I'm dragging and dropping. That is there by default because we set the auto hide to false. If we set that to true, we could come back over here, run this guy again. And now the scroll bar is gone unless we hover over it, and boom, there it is. And if we scroll down and then scroll our mouse away again, it disappears again. So maybe you like that, maybe you don't. I'm not a huge fan of that. But, whatever. And like I said, we could change the boot style to anything we want. If we wanted to change this to danger, this is going to look god-awful. But we could change the whole frame to red. And then the scroll bar is also red. It has little red arrows and things, and I don't like that one bit. Let's just go ahead and change that back to dark. And I'm also going to change this back to false for the auto hide. So that is really all there is to it. Let's go ahead and save this. Or, you know what? Let's change this to light. I don't know, I'm just playing around right now. Run this again. That's not great looking, but whatever. So that's really all there is to it. Much easier than the old Kinter way of having to actually create a scroll bar, adding it in, setting the configuration stuff. It was just a hassle. TTK Bootstrap makes this so much easier. So you have your scrolled frame or your scrolled text box like we did in the last video. It's basically the same thing, but instead of a frame, it's a text box. So you can type words and stuff in it, and very, very useful. And very cool. In this video, we're going to look at toast messages. What are toast messages? Well, if you look down there, there it is right there, sort of the bottom of the screen, fades away. We can click it again. Hey, it pops back up. Little message, little icon next to it, little Windows thing. And that's what we're going to look at. So I've got some basic Kinter starter code that we always have. I'm calling it toasty.py because we're doing toast messages. And we're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB. We're using the superhero theme as we always do in these videos. And everything else is pretty much the same. So in order to use these, we actually have to import these. This is a little extra thing in TTK Bootstrap. So we can do that pretty easily. Let's just go from TTK Bootstrap.toast. We want to import toast notification. And notice the T and the N are capitalized. That's kind of important. So let's come down here and let's create one of these things. I'm just going to call it toast. And this is going to be a toast notification. Again, capital T, capital N. And then inside of here, we can give this a title. So I'm going to say my toast title, whatever. And there's a bunch of different attributes we can play with. After title, obviously, we want a message. And we could say this is a toast message. Woohoo! All right. There we go. And then we can also set a duration if we want. So this is in milliseconds. So if I want 3 seconds, that would be 3,000 milliseconds, right? There we go. And we can also give this an alert. This can be either true or false. I'm going to do true. And this will just give a little ding, a little like system bell whenever the alert pops up. You may want that, you may not. I'll put it on there. I don't even know if you can hear it with the microphone set up here, but you know what a normal Windows system ding is. It goes ding, just it'll do that. So we'll put that as true. And then finally, you could put a position, and this is going to be a tuple, and it takes 3 things: horizontal, vertical, and anchor. So if you don't put a position at all, if you leave this completely off, it'll just show up in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Now, that's a little bit of a problem for me because I've got 2 monitors set up here, and I'm recording on the left monitor, and the default monitor is my right monitor, so it'll show up on the right monitor, and you guys won't be able to see it. So I'm going to move it over 1915 pixels by 30 pixels. And instead of it being in the bottom right, I want to put it in the bottom left. And so that's the southwest. Now for the anchor position, this last thing, now this is a string, and it could be all of the normal sort of directional things in Tkinter: north, south, east, west, northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast, etc. Right? So all of those normal things you can use. So we'll just put that like that, and that looks good. Now we need something to trigger this thing, so I'm just going to create a little button. I'm going to call this my_button, and it's going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in root. We want the text to equal what? Click me, right? And let's give this a command of, I don't know, clicker, something like that, and we'll create this function in just a second. For now, let's my_button.pack this guy onto the screen. And let's give this a pad Y of 40 to really push it down the screen a little bit. Okay, so now we can come up here and let's create that function real quick, that clicker function. And in order to show your toast notification, your toast message, you just call the name of it. In this case, it's toast dot show _ toast, and that's a function. And that's all there is to it. So let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my ctkinter.com directory. And let's run python toast.py. And when we do, we've got this button here. If we click it, boom, it pops up. After 3 seconds, it fades away. Now I'm going to do it again without talking. See if you can hear the little alert ding. Probably not. But 1, 2, 3, boom, it fades away. So that's kind of all there is to it. Now we can take out the duration if we want. Save this and run it, see what happens then. So we click this. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009. Just seems to be going on and on. If we click it, it disappears. Or if we click somewhere else in the app, nope, we have to actually click the thing itself. So if you don't have a duration, it'll just be there kind of forever, right? And also we could play around with the position. Remember, this is horizontal and vertical. So if we want it to go up more, I don't know, we can make this 300 or so. We run this. Now it's going to be way up here. So you can position this anywhere you want on a screen. Remember, your screen isn't like everybody else's screen, so you may want to keep that in mind when using a position. But, pretty cool. And you see my toast title has a title here in bold. We've got this little Windows icon. And pretty simple. So remember, just import it up here in this first line, toast notification from ttkbootstrap.toast. I know up here we kind of imported everything. Why do we have to keep importing separate things? I don't know, it's just the way it is. But pretty simple. Again, just to use it, we call it toast notification. Got your title, your message, your duration. Let me uncomment that out. Alert and position. And of course, you don't have to do a position. Otherwise, it'll just default into the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, I believe. Yeah. And that's all there is to it. All right, so that is TTK Bootstrap in a nutshell. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more about TTK Bootstrap and Tkinter in general, be sure to check out my tkinter.com YouTube channel. And of course, check out tkinter.com. Think about signing up for membership there. You get all my courses for one low price. And while you're there, be sure to grab a totally free PDF copy of my Tkinter Widget Quick Reference Guide book. This thing is awesome, has all the Tkinter widget attributes spelled out in great detail. Grab your free copy today. Just head over to tkinter.com/widget-book. Enter your email address and I'll send that right out to you. So yeah, I think that's it. My name is John Elder from tkinter.com, and I'll see you in the next video.